substantial financial relief to every single person receiving Social Security benefits. The headline feature of this act is a real game changer, a proposed across-the-board increase of $200 per month. And let me be clear, this is not a one-time check. This would be a permanent boost added to every single monthly payment for everyone, from retired workers to people on disability. So what does that look like over a year? Well, it adds up to an extra $2,400. For any household on a fixed income, that is not just a number. That's real security. That's money for a car repair you didn't see coming. It could cover months of utility bills. Frankly, it can be the difference between just getting by and facing a real crisis. Okay, let's put some real numbers to this. The average Social Security benefit right now is about $1,838 a month. With this change, it would jump to over $2,000, $2,038 to be exact. That's an 11% increase. I mean, think about that. For someone on a fixed income, an 11% raise just like that is absolutely massive. It provides some serious breathing room in a budget that is often stretched way too thin. Next up is a change that sounds a little technical, but stick with me because this is so important. It has to do with the annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA. Right now, the formula is based on how younger urban workers spend their money. The problem? That formula really doesn't account for the massive healthcare and housing costs that seniors actually face. So the proposal is to switch to something called the CPIE, which is an index based on how the elderly actually spend. This would make sure benefits keep up with the real inflation seniors are experiencing. And over a long retirement, that could mean thousands and thousands of extra dollars. This is another truly transformative part of the Expansion Act. It sets up a brand new, much stronger minimum benefit. And the goal here is simple, but it's profound. If you work for 30 years, paying into the system your whole life, you should not retire into poverty, period. The new minimum would be set at 125% of the federal poverty level. For millions of people who've spent their lives in tough, low-wage jobs, this would be an absolute lifeline, ensuring a basic level of dignity they've earned. Okay, let's shift gears now to the SSI Restoration Act. This one is all about modernizing the rules for supplemental security income. SSI is a critical safety net for about 8 million of our most vulnerable Americans, but a lot of its rules are just wildly out of date. We're talking decades old. The first big change here is a direct, substantial increase in the benefit itself. The current maximum federal SSI benefit is just $943 a month, which means recipients are actually living below the poverty line. This proposal would raise that benefit all the way up to 100% of the federal poverty level, which is about $1,255 a month. That's an extra $312 every single month, a 33% boost designed to pull people out of poverty, full stop. Now, this proposal also tackles one of the most ridiculous SSI rules on the books, the asset limit. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. It has not been updated since 1984. 1984. The current limit of just $2,000 makes it literally impossible to save for an emergency. This proposal raises it to $10,000 for an individual and $20,000 for a couple. For the first time, this would allow people to build a small safety net without being punished for it. The current SSI rules also create what is just an impossible choice for so many people. It's because of something known as the marriage penalty. Right now, if two people who both receive SSI benefits decide to get married, their total combined benefit gets cut by nearly 25%. I mean, can you imagine? It forces countless couples to choose between getting legally married and their own financial survival. So, the SSI Restoration Act has a very clear, very compassionate solution. Just get rid of the marriage penalty completely. Under this change, two SSI recipients who get married would continue to receive the exact same total benefit they did as two single people. It basically says that people with disabilities have every right to build a life together without facing a devastating financial punishment for it. Okay, so we've looked at all the individual pieces of these proposals, but the real magic, the real power happens when you start stacking them all together. This is where you can truly see the combined financial impact these changes could have on people's everyday lives. So let's take a real-world example. Imagine someone who's worked their entire life in low-wage jobs. First, they'd get that flat $200 boost that everyone gets. Then, on top of that, the new minimum benefit rule could add another $300 to $500 to their monthly check. You add it all up, and their monthly retirement income could increase by $500, $600, maybe even $700. For many people,
That could nearly double their income, transforming their retirement from a struggle to one of basic security.
And if you thought that was incredible, wait until you see the impact for a married couple with disabilities on SSI. It's just revolutionary. The benefit increase adds $624 a month. Then, eliminating that cruel marriage penalty restores another $471. That is a total monthly gain of $1,095. Annually, that's over $13,000 more a year, a 77% income boost that would fundamentally change their quality of life. Of course, a big question is probably popping into your head right about now. Expanding benefits is great, but how do we make sure the system is strong for generations to come? Well, that's where the third proposal, the Social Security 2100 Act, comes into play. It's all about long-term solvency, and it adds a few more really key improvements. This is it. This is the question on everyone's mind, right? A major expansion of benefits like this needs a serious plan to pay for it, not just for today, but for decades to come. And the Social Security 2100 Act proposes a very specific way to do just that. Okay, here's how the funding would work, and it's actually pretty straightforward. Right now, there's a cap on the income that's subject to Social Security payroll taxes. This proposal would keep everything the same for most people, but it would reapply the tax on all earnings above $400,000 a year. Let me be super clear about this. For 99.6% of Americans, taxes would not change at all. This plan only affects the top 0.4% of earners, asking them to contribute more to secure the system for everyone. And get this, the 2100 Act also includes a tax cut for millions of Social Security beneficiaries. Right now, your benefits can be taxed if your total income is over just $25,000. This proposal would double that threshold to $50,000 for individuals and more than triple it to $100,000 for married couples. For a whole lot of middle-income retirees, that means an immediate increase in their take-home pay. So with all these transformative ideas on the table, what's the real chance of them becoming law? It's really important to understand that what we've been talking about are proposals. They're being debated right now in Congress. They aren't established law yet. Yeah, the legislative process is a long road. These bills have to get through committees in both the House and the Senate. Then they have to get a vote on the floor. And a lot of the time, the House and Senate pass different versions, which then have to be worked out before one final bill can be sent to the president. It's a whole process, and public support really does play a crucial role. And that public support? It's incredibly strong. A recent poll found that 84% of all Americans, including a remarkable 78% of Republicans, support increasing Social Security benefits. So while the politicians in Washington might be debating, it seems the public has pretty much made up its mind. This is not a partisan issue for most people. It's just a widely shared belief that this system needs to be strengthened. Ultimately, all these proposals, all these numbers and tables, they force us to ask a really fundamental question. They move the conversation beyond just accounting and ask us all to think about the value of dignity, of security, and of peace of mind for millions of our fellow citizens. What is the true value of a secure retirement and of a society that actually honors the promises it makes to people who've worked their whole lives? That's the real question at the heart of this entire debate. Today, we are jumping right into a topic that really hits home for millions of Americans: Social Security. We're going to go way beyond the headlines to look at some specific proposals on the table right now, ideas that could seriously change your monthly budget, your peace of mind, and really your whole future. We're going to break down the numbers, the rules, and what it could all mean for you. So let's just start with a question. I want you to take a second and really think about this. What if your monthly check actually covered all of your bills? I mean, everything. The rent, the lights, food, your prescriptions, and you still had money left over at the end of the month. How would that feel? That feeling? Well, that's the promise behind the reforms we're going to explore today. You know, for so many people, the end of the month is this constant, stressful tightrope walk, figuring out what gets paid and what has to wait. But the proposals we're about to dive into, they're not just abstract ideas. They represent a potential path to real, tangible relief from that day-in, day-out financial pressure. All right, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. We're going to look at the actual dollar figures being proposed and translate them into what really matters, the real-world impact on your wallet. This is where a policy written on paper starts to feel like a meaningful change in your actual life. So the most straightforward ideas are the ones that, well, put more money in your pocket each month. Let's start right there and look at what could be a pretty significant across-the-board increase for Social Security beneficiaries. Okay, so a major piece of legislation that's being discussed is called the Social Security Expansion Act. And the cornerstone of this act is a direct, across the board increase for every single person receiving Social Security, an extra $200 each and every month. And this isn't some temporary fix. We're talking about a permanent boost to your base benefit. You know, an extra 200 bucks isn't just a number on a statement. In real life, that's a week's worth of fresh, healthy groceries instead of just relying on canned goods. It's being able to cover your prescriptions without having to choose between your health and some other bill. It's paying the electric bill in full, on time, without that constant worry about a late fee or a shutoff notice. For a lot of folks, it's just the peace of mind knowing that if your glasses break, you can actually afford to get them fixed without a full-blown crisis. And when you zoom out and look at it over a whole year, the impact gets even bigger. That $200 a month adds up to an extra $2,400. That is a really significant amount of money. Think about what that could do. Maybe it's that essential dental work you've been putting off for years, or a new set of tires for the car so you feel safe on the road. It creates a financial cushion that right now just doesn't exist for so many people. Now, beyond just a flat-out raise, another really crucial proposal tackles the annual cost of living adjustments, or COLA. Right now, the COLA is calculated using a formula that tracks what younger working people buy. The problem? Well, retirees and seniors spend their money very differently. A much, much bigger chunk of their income goes to things like healthcare, and healthcare costs are rising way faster than general inflation. So this proposal would switch to a new formula, one designed specifically for the elderly that gives more weight to the things people are actually spending their money on. The bottom line is, your benefits wouldn't just get a one-time boost. They'd be better protected from losing their buying power year after year. Now let's switch gears and talk about Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, because here the proposed changes are even more dramatic. The SSI Restoration Act is aiming to lift benefits from the current level of around $943 a month all the way up to the federal poverty line, which would be about $1,255. That's an increase of $312 every single month. I mean, that is a genuine lifeline that could pull millions of people out of poverty and give them a shot at real stability. On top of all these permanent monthly increases, there's also serious discussion happening about another round of one-time stimulus payments. This idea would provide an immediate cash injection of $1,400 to help people deal with urgent, pressing needs that have been piling up. This isn't for long-term planning. This is about immediate help right now. A lump sum payment like this is all about tackling those big, stressful problems that keep you up at night. It could mean finally getting caught up on past due bills, getting that dental work you've been putting off for years, or paying down a high-interest credit card. And that last one is huge, because paying off that kind of debt doesn't just solve an immediate problem, it frees up more of your cash every single month going forward. It's a chance to hit the reset button. All right, so putting more cash in people's pockets is absolutely critical, but it's really only half of the puzzle. The other half is about fixing these outdated and frankly unfair rules that can trap people in poverty and limit their most basic life choices. So let's look at how these proposals want to fix the system itself. This quote, it just says it all, doesn't it? It gets right to the heart of one of the most punishing rules in the current SSI system, what's known as the marriage penalty. Right now, the system literally penalizes two people on SSI financially if they decide to get married. These new reforms are built on a very simple principle. Your benefits shouldn't force you to choose between financial security and the person you love. Just take a look at these numbers. It's kind of shocking when you see it laid out like this. Right now, two individuals on SSI get a combined $1,886. But if they get married, their benefit gets slashed to $1,415. They lose almost $500 a month just for getting married. The proposal gets rid of that penalty completely. And when you combine that with the benefit increase we just talked about, a married couple would bring in over $1,000 more per month than they do today. This is a complete game changer that restores dignity to relationships. Here's another rule that's just incredibly out of date. Since 1984, that's right, 1984, SSI recipients have not been allowed to have more than $2,000 in assets without losing their benefits. Just to put that in perspective, $2,000 back then would be worth over $6,000 today. The rule is stuck in the past. The proposal would raise this limit to a much more realistic $10,000. This means you could finally have a real emergency fund. If the car breaks down, you don't have to go into debt, you can have some money set aside. It provides a level of security that is basically impossible right now. So we've looked at the direct payments and we've looked at the rule changes. Now let's try to put it all together. What would daily life actually feel like if all of this became reality? Because this is about more than just numbers on a page. It's about a total shift in your day-to-day existence. So picture your morning. Instead of waking up with that familiar knot of anxiety in your stomach about which bill you can afford to pay, you wake up with a sense of calm. You can take your medicine on time without worrying about the cost of the refill. You can have a healthy breakfast because you actually had the money to buy fresh groceries. The entire tone of your day changes before you've even had your first cup of coffee. And that feeling of security carries right through your afternoon. A trip to the grocery store becomes about choosing nutritious food, not just what's cheapest. You have the freedom to say yes when a friend asks you to go grab a cup of coffee. You can make a doctor's appointment without dreading the copay. All these little freedoms add up to a life that feels less isolated and more connected, healthier, and just fuller. And at night, that constant grinding worry that keeps so many people awake can finally start to fade. Just knowing you have a small savings account for an emergency, knowing your income is stable and will actually keep up with rising costs, that financial security is directly tied to better physical and mental health. It means you can actually rest, and that's absolutely essential for your well-being. And this quote really sums up the entire goal here. For far too long, the system has forced millions of people into a state of just barely surviving, where every single day is a struggle just to get by. These reforms are all about making a crucial shift, from just surviving to actually living. It's about having the resources and the peace of mind to enjoy your retirement, your relationships, and your life with the dignity that you absolutely deserve. Now, it is really important to remember that this more secure future we're talking about isn't a guarantee just yet. All the ideas we've discussed are inside legislative proposals that are being debated right now. They need political will and, just as importantly, public support to actually get signed into law. So let's just quickly run through the key proposals we touched on. You've got the Social Security Expansion Act, which is where that big $200 monthly increase comes from. There's the SSI Restoration Act, which would raise those benefits and fix the marriage penalty and asset limits. You also have the Social Security 2100 Act, which includes benefit improvements and tax relief. And then separate from all that is the ongoing talk about another one-time stimulus payment for immediate help. So, for anyone who believes in these changes, the path forward really involves taking action. That means things like contacting your elected representatives to let them know where you stand. Sharing your own personal story can be incredibly powerful. It puts a human face on all these numbers. And of course, voting for candidates who support these issues and joining advocacy groups adds your voice to a growing chorus that's demanding change. So, we're going to end right where we began, with a question for you to think about. After hearing all these details, the numbers, the potential changes, what would this level of financial security truly mean for you, for your family, for your future? What doors would it open? What worries would it finally close? That vision, that's what this entire conversation is really about. And it's a future that a lot of people believe is worth fighting for.
Today, we're going to get into a topic that is on a lot of people's minds, the future of Social Security. There are some major proposals being discussed right now that can mean a huge increase in benefits. So we're going to break down exactly what these changes could mean for your wallet.
You know, this one sentence really gets to the heart of what's driving these reforms. It's such a powerful idea. It frames this whole conversation not just as policy talk, but about the kind of society we actually want to live in. You know, one where a lifetime of hard work is rewarded with security, not constant worry.
And that is the billion-dollar question, isn't it? It's the one we're here to answer today. I mean, it's one thing to talk about big ideas like dignity and security, but it's a whole other thing to see what that means in actual dollars and cents. How does this vision translate into cold, hard cash for you or the people you care about?
Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with that big vision, then we'll break down the 3 key legislative proposals that are making all this happen. After that, we're getting into the real numbers, looking at the financial impact on 3 different groups: the average retiree, the person who's worked low-wage jobs their whole life, and SSI recipients. And then we'll wrap it all up by looking at the big picture.
So let's be clear. Our focus today is 100% on the numbers. We're going to move past all the political back and forth and just give you a clear financial picture of what these potential reforms could mean for millions of Americans.
Okay, so to really understand these potential financial shifts, we first have to look at the 3 main legislative acts that are the engines behind all this.
Each one tackles a different part of the system, but when you put them together, well, they create a pretty comprehensive overhaul.
All right, first up is the Social Security Expansion Act. The main feature here is super simple and super powerful. A direct, across-the-board increase of $200 a month for every single beneficiary. That's an extra $2,400 a year. For the average person on Social Security, that's like getting an 11% raise overnight. A huge deal for anyone on a fixed income.
Next, we have the SSI Restoration Act. Now, this one is laser-focused on the 8 million Americans, the elderly, blind, and disabled, who rely on supplemental security income. Right now, the maximum federal benefit actually leaves people living below the poverty line. This act would change that, period. It would raise benefits to 100% of the federal poverty level.
And the third piece of this puzzle is the Social Security 2100 Act. This one kind of takes the long view. It has a bunch of improvements, but for our purposes, there are two key things to know. It creates a new, much stronger minimum benefit for folks who've worked in low-wage jobs their whole lives, and it provides some significant tax relief for beneficiaries.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, because these proposals aren't mutually exclusive. Their effects can actually be combined. So let's start by looking at what this combination of reforms could mean for an average retiree. We're talking about a real transformation in their financial reality. So the average Social Security benefit today is hovering around $1,838 a month. Right off the bat, the Expansion Act adds a flat $200. On top of that, a proposed change to how cost of living adjustments are calculated could add another, say, $10 to $15. And then the tax relief from the 2100 Act could put another $50 to $75 back in their pocket. You add it all up, and the average retiree could see their monthly income jump by about $300.
And listen, this is not a small change. That $300 a month adds up to $3,600 over the course of a year. For someone living on about $22,000 a year, that is a 16% increase in their total income. That is genuinely transformative.
So what does an extra $3,600 a year actually buy you? It buys you peace of mind. It means you no longer have to choose between refilling your prescriptions and buying a full cart of groceries. It means when the car gets a flat tire, it doesn't automatically become a financial crisis that sends you into debt. It's the difference between just getting by and having the breathing room to maybe save a little, go visit the grandkids, or just enjoy a hobby. It's about restoring dignity.
So, if the impact on the average retiree is significant, for people who have spent a lifetime in physically demanding, low-wage jobs, well, it's nothing short of revolutionary. These are the folks who have so often fallen through the cracks of the system as it is. It's a harsh reality that right now, someone can work for 30 years in a low-wage job and still retire into poverty. These proposals would completely flip that script. They'd get that same $200 bump from the Expansion Act, but then the new minimum benefit from the 2100 Act could add another $300 to $500 per month. With tax relief on top, we're talking a total monthly increase of between $530 and $750. For a lot of these folks, that could nearly double their retirement income.
Seriously, let's just pause on that number for a second. An annual increase of up to $9,000. This isn't just about a little financial relief. This is a fundamental shift. It's the difference between retiring into poverty and retiring with a basic level of security and dignity that actually honors a lifetime of work.
This changes everything. It means having enough money for healthy food and to actually see a doctor when you need to. It means having a small cushion for emergencies instead of being one unexpected bill away from total disaster. For millions of people, home health aides, farm workers, childcare providers, this provides a level of security in their later years that was probably unimaginable before.
Now let's turn to the 8 million Americans on supplemental security income. We're talking about some of our nation's most vulnerable citizens, the elderly, the blind, and the disabled. And for this group, these proposed changes would be absolutely life-altering.
The current max federal SSI benefit is $943 a month, which, yes, is below the poverty line. The SSI Restoration Act would boost that to $1,255. That's an immediate $312 extra every single month. That's a 33% raise that lifts people out of poverty in one single move.
Over a year, that's an increase of more than $3,700. And again, this isn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It represents the very real, tangible difference between living in poverty and living with a baseline of dignity, free from that constant grinding anxiety of never having enough.
But the changes here go even deeper than the monthly check. And this one is just incredible. The SSI Restoration Act also fixes one of the system's most outdated, punishing rules, the asset limit. For 40 years, since 1984, Recipients couldn't have more than $2,000 in savings. This proposal raises that limit 5 times over, to $10,000, finally allowing millions to build a small emergency fund without the fear of losing their benefits.
And it also gets rid of another major, frankly inhumane problem, the marriage penalty. As it stands now, if 2 people on SSI get married, their combined benefits get cut by almost 25%. It forces this impossible choice between having a relationship and financial survival. This proposal ends that. A married couple's benefit would go from that penalized $1,415 a month to a full $2,510. That is a 77% income increase. It's about affirming the right to build a life with someone you love without being punished for it.
So when you take a step back and you look at the combined effect of all these proposed changes, the across-the-board increase, the stronger minimum benefits, the tax relief, and these really humane reforms to SSI, it's clear we're not just talking about a small adjustment. We're talking about fundamentally redrawing the map of financial security for millions of Americans.
And that really is the big story here. This whole suite of reforms is designed to move millions of people from a state of just surviving to a state of stability. It's about replacing anxiety with confidence and desperation with dignity. It's about giving people the financial breathing room to not just get through the day, but to actually plan for tomorrow, for next year, for the rest of their lives.
So we end with this question. Because these proposals, with all their numbers and details, they really represent a choice about what we value as a society. They present a very clear vision of a future with more security, more dignity for millions. And the question that leaves for all of us is, what kind of future will we choose to build?
Today, we are jumping right into the future of Social Security. There's a huge package of reforms being discussed that could literally transform the financial lives of millions of Americans. So, we're going to focus on the one question that really matters. What could these changes actually mean for your bank account? Let's get into it. You know, this quote right here, it really gets to the heart of what all of this is about. This isn't just about tweaking some numbers in a government program. It's about a bigger vision, about rethinking what security and quality of life should look like for our seniors and our most vulnerable citizens. It really sets the stage for everything we're about to cover. Okay, so a big vision is great, but let's get real. How does that lofty goal actually translate into dollars and cents? That's what we're here to do. We're going to break down the exact proposals to give you a super clear financial picture of what these increases could look like, month by month and year by year. All right, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with that big vision, then we'll break down the 3 key proposals that make it happen. After that, we'll get into the real numbers, looking at the financial impact on average retirees, low-wage workers, and SSI recipients. And finally, we'll zoom out and look at the bigger picture. So for this entire explainer, I want to be crystal clear. We are going to focus entirely on the proposed increases in benefits. Now, I know there are always complex debates about how to pay for things, but for right now, our goal is to show you the numbers, to clarify what the potential upside could look like in your pocket. We want you to see how this could be a really significant financial shift for millions. To really understand the potential impact, you first have to know where it's all coming from. There are basically 3 key bills at the center of this whole effort. So let's quickly break down what each one is trying to accomplish. First up, we've got the Social Security Expansion Act. Think of this as the foundation. Its biggest, most powerful feature is super simple. A $200 a month across-the-board increase for every single beneficiary. That's an extra $2,400 a year. For an average person, that's like getting an 11% raise overnight. It's a foundational lift for absolutely everyone. Next is the SSI Restoration Act. Now, this one is laser-focused on the 8 million elderly, blind, and disabled Americans who rely on supplemental security income. Right now, the maximum benefit actually leaves people living below the poverty line. So this act aims to fix that, straight up, by raising the benefit to 100% of the federal poverty level. It's about providing immediate, substantial relief. And the third piece of the puzzle is the Social Security 2100 Act. This is a really broad proposal, but we're going to zero in on its 2 major benefit boosts. First, some pretty significant tax relief for beneficiaries. And second, a much, much stronger minimum benefit for people who've spent their entire lives working in low-wage jobs. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. See, these proposals aren't designed to exist in a vacuum. They're meant to stack on top of each other. So let's start our financial breakdown by looking at what happens when you combine their effects for the average retiree in America today. Let's just walk through this table together. So an average retiree today gets about $1,838 a month. Okay. Under these reforms, boom, the Social Security Expansion Act immediately adds a flat $200. On top of that, that same act changes the cost of living formula, which could add another $10 to $15 a month. And then the Social Security 2100 Act kicks in with tax relief, adding another $50 to $75 to their take-home. You put it all together, and you're looking at a jump of around $300 every single month. And that monthly increase adds up fast. We're talking about an additional $3,600 in income every single year. For somebody on a fixed income, that's a 16% boost. That's not a small tweak. That is a really significant enhancement to their financial stability. But what does $3,600 a year actually do? It means you're no longer having to choose between refilling a prescription and buying a full cart of groceries. It means when the water heater breaks, it's an annoyance, not a financial disaster that shoves you into debt. It gives you the breathing room to maybe actually save a little, to plan, to visit your grandkids without feeling guilty. It's a shift from just surviving to actually living. Now, the impact on an average retiree is huge, but for those who have spent an entire lifetime in low-wage jobs, the effect is even more profound. I mean, for people who currently work for decades just to retire directly into poverty, these changes could completely redefine what retirement means. Just take a look at these numbers. A lifetime low-wage worker gets that same $200 flat increase, right? But then the new minimum benefit rules kick in, and that could add another $300 to $500 per month. You throw in some tax relief, and the total monthly increase could be between $530 and $750. In a lot of cases, that would nearly double their retirement income. Annually, this could be an increase of up to $9,000. Let that sink in. This isn't just about making things a little bit easier. This is a fundamental change that lifts a person from a state of poverty, where every single day is a struggle, to a basic level of security and dignity that actually honors a lifetime of hard work. So, what does this transformation look like in real life? It means being able to afford healthy food and consistent medical care. It means having a small cushion for emergencies, so a flat tire doesn't completely derail your entire life. For someone who has worked for decades in physically demanding jobs for very little pay, this provides a level of security in their later years that was probably unimaginable before. It's a profound shift. Now let's turn to the 8 million Americans who get supplemental security income. For this group, which includes many of our most vulnerable elderly and disabled citizens, the proposed changes from the SSI Restoration Act would be, and I don't say this lightly, truly life-altering. The most direct change is a big benefit increase. The current max benefit is $943 a month, which is below the poverty line. The proposal would raise that to $1,255. That's an immediate increase of $312 a month, a 33% boost, specifically designed to lift recipients up to 100% of the federal poverty level. This annual increase of over $3,700 represents the financial line between living in poverty and having a basic level of dignity. It provides the resources for stable housing, for consistent nutrition, things that are a constant struggle for so many people right now. But the proposed changes go way beyond the monthly check. This one is huge. The current asset limit for SSI recipients is just $2,000, a number that hasn't changed since 1984. You're basically penalized for saving. The proposal raises this limit to $10,000 and ties it to inflation. This is a monumental shift, allowing people to build a real emergency fund for the first time without the fear of losing their essential benefits. And then there's this other major change, which addresses the marriage penalty. Right now, it's wild. If two people on SSI get married, their combined benefit gets cut by about 25%. It forces this horrible choice between a partnership and financial survival. This proposal just eliminates that penalty completely. So a married couple's benefit could jump from a penalized $1,415 a month to a full $2,510. That's a 77% increase. It affirms the right to build a life together without financial punishment. So, when you step back and you look at all these proposed changes together, the across-the-board increases, the stronger minimum benefits, the relief for SSI recipients, the potential impact is just immense. The entire financial security landscape in America could be fundamentally redrawn for millions and millions of people. Ultimately, the theme here, the big idea, is a shift in perspective. These reforms are all about moving people from a state of constant financial anxiety, just trying to make it through the day or the week, to a place of stability. It's about restoring dignity, choice, and the ability for millions to look ahead with a measure of confidence instead of fear. In the end, all these numbers and policies, they really lead to a much bigger question. These proposals are more than just policy tweaks. They represent a choice about our national priorities. They ask what kind of society we want to be, one that ensures dignity for people who've worked their whole lives and for those who are most vulnerable among us. So the real question is, what kind of future will we choose to build?
So what if every single person on Social Security got an extra $200 a month? Today we're diving into several major proposals that want to do exactly that, and a whole lot more. We're going to get into the precise numbers, don't worry. But this is about something much bigger than a spreadsheet. It's about a whole new vision for what financial security could look like for millions of us.
And this quote right here, it really gets to the heart of it. The whole idea behind these proposed changes is to focus on the human impact. It's not just about tweaking the numbers, it's about fundamentally changing lives for the better.
All right, so here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we'll talk about that big picture vision for security. Then we'll dive right into the details of the proposed increases. After that, we'll see what those numbers actually mean in real life. And we'll finish up by looking at what all this means beyond just the bank account.
So the first big idea here is this huge shift in thinking. The goal of these proposals isn't just to help people scrape by or merely survive. The vision is to create a future where seniors and people with disabilities can actually thrive with real financial security and dignity.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to break down the key parts of three major proposals. That's the Social Security Expansion Act, the SSI Restoration Act, and the Social Security 2100 Act. We're talking about the exact dollar amounts they want to bring to the table.
Let's start with the Social Security Expansion Act. One of its core ideas is super straightforward: a flat increase of $200 a month for every single Social Security beneficiary. No strings, just a direct boost.
Now, what does that flat $200 actually look like? Well, for an average person, it's about an 11% raise. But here's where it gets really impactful. For someone getting the minimum benefit, that same $200 is more like a 21% increase. And for a retired couple, you're looking at an extra $4,800 a year. That is significant.
But it's not just a one-time boost. The Act also wants to change the formula for the annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA, to something called the CPIE. It's designed to better track the costs seniors actually face, like healthcare. And the effect of this just grows over time. After 10 years, it's an extra $72 a month. But fast forward 20 years, and it's an extra $181 a month. That adds up to about $22,000 in extra benefits over 2 decades.
And this next part is a really big deal. Another key goal is to pull people out of poverty by setting a brand new, higher minimum benefit for folks who've worked their whole lives at low wages. The proposal would set this new floor at 125% of the federal poverty level. That means going from about $950 a month to $1,500. That is a nearly 58% jump. Huge.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. This is the program that supports some of our most vulnerable Americans, and the SSI Restoration Act is proposing some major updates here.
So this proposal really tackles two massive issues. First, it would raise the monthly benefit up to the federal poverty line. Second, and this is wild, it would update the asset limit for the first time since 1984. Think about that. It would go from just $2,000 to $10,000. That means people could actually save for an emergency without getting kicked off their benefits.
Now here's something in the current SSI system that a lot of people find shocking. It's often called the marriage penalty. Right now, if two people on SSI decide to get married, their combined benefit gets cut by 25%. We're talking a drop from nearly $1,900 a month down to just over $1,400. That's an annual loss of more than $5,600.
So, the SSI Restoration Act has a very simple solution. Get rid of it. Completely. Under the proposed new benefit rates, a married couple would get the exact same amount as two unmarried people. No penalty. You get married, your benefits stay the same. Simple as that.
And finally, let's look at the Social Security 2100 Act, which focuses on some serious tax relief. Right now, your benefits can start getting taxed if your income is over just $25,000 for an individual or $32,000 for a couple. This proposal would double that threshold for single folks to $50,000 and more than triple it for couples to $100,000. For millions of seniors, this is basically another pay raise because their benefits would suddenly become tax-free.
Whew. Okay, so we've just thrown a ton of numbers at you. What does all of this actually mean for someone's wallet at the end of the month? Let's connect these proposals to the reality of everyday life and see what the combined impact really looks like.
For your average retiree, when you combine that $200 monthly boost with the tax savings, you could be looking at an extra $283 to $325 a month. That's not just a number on a page. That's your prescription copays covered, that's your utility bill, that's a few weeks of groceries. It creates real breathing room in a tight budget. Now, for a lifetime low-wage worker, the effect is absolutely life-altering. You see it happen in stages. First, that $200 increase brings them up to $1,150. Then, that new minimum benefit floor kicks in and lifts them all the way up to $1,500 a month. All told, that's an increase of over 60%. It's literally a ladder out of poverty.
And for a married couple with disabilities, the change is just staggering. By getting rid of that marriage penalty and raising the benefits, their monthly income could leap from around $1,400 to over $2,500. That's a 77% increase. And at the same time, their savings limit would jump from $3,000 to $20,000.
But you know, this whole story isn't just about the money. You can't just measure the impact in dollars and cents. Let's zoom back out and talk about the human side of all this. What does this kind of security really mean for a person's well-being?
One of the biggest goals here is relief. Relief from that constant low-level hum of anxiety that comes with financial instability. It's about being able to answer the phone without fearing it's a bill collector. It's about being able to go to the doctor when you're sick, not just when it's an emergency. It creates peace of mind.
And that brings us to the dignity of choice. You see, poverty shrinks your world. It takes away your options. When you have enough, you can make choices based on your health and well-being, not just on what's cheapest. You can choose to buy fresh, healthy food. You can choose to get preventative care. It puts people back in control of their own lives.
And that idea of control extends to our most basic human relationships. Supporters of these changes see eliminating the marriage penalty as a fundamental human rights issue. The argument is simple. People with disabilities should be able to marry for love without the government slapping them with a devastating financial punishment for it.
So let's wrap this all up. What's the big picture? These proposals are aiming for a totally new level of financial security. We're talking monthly increases from a couple hundred to over $1,000, new benefit floors to lift millions from poverty, much higher savings limits, and an end to the SSI marriage penalty. It's all about restoring dignity and dialing down that daily anxiety.
We've been through all the detailed numbers, the specific plans, and the profound human impact, and it leaves us with this final thought. What could this kind of security truly unlock for millions of Americans, for their families, and for all of our communities? What does a future where we move from just surviving to actually thriving, what does that really look like?
Today, we're diving deep into some major Social Security reforms that are being talked about right now. These proposals could literally change the entire financial picture for millions of people. We're going to get into the specific dollar amounts, the different plans on the table, and what it all could actually mean for you. So, let's start with a feeling I think a lot of people know all too well. You know, it's that pit in your stomach at the end of the month, looking at the bills piling up, looking at what's left, and just wondering, how am I going to make this stretch? That constant stress is exactly what these new proposals are trying to fix. All right, so to make this super clear, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll talk about the big idea, the promise behind all of this. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the plans for Social Security and for SSI. And finally, we'll piece it all together to see what your new financial reality could look like. Okay, let's jump in. Before we even get to the numbers, it's really important to get what the goal is here. The whole point of these reforms is to close that massive gap between what people get in their benefits and what it actually costs to live today. It's all about building a bridge from financial struggle to financial security. This right here, this gets to the absolute heart of it. This isn't just about dollars and cents. It's about getting rid of that constant nagging anxiety. You know, the freedom to just live your life without worrying that one small emergency, one flat tire, could derail everything. It's about moving from just surviving to actually feeling stable. So how exactly would these plans build that kind of stability? Well, let's look at the first big proposal, which is all about a simple idea: putting more money directly into your pocket every single month. The first piece of the puzzle we're looking at is called the Social Security Expansion Act, and its main goal is super straightforward: to increase the monthly benefit check for every single person receiving Social Security. No exceptions. So what's the headline number? It's a flat increase of $200 a month. And what's really key here is that this isn't some complicated formula. It's an across-the-board boost for every single recipient. But let's be real. What does $200 actually mean in day-to-day life? Well, for a lot of people, that could be a full week of groceries. It could cover your prescription copays for the month, or maybe the entire utility bill. It could mean a small emergency, like your glasses breaking, is just an inconvenience, not a full-blown crisis. And if you zoom out and look at the whole year, that $200 a month adds up to an extra $2,400. Now that's a serious amount of money. That could be what you need for some major dental work you've been putting off, or maybe even a trip to finally go visit your grandkids. Okay, stick with me because this next part's a little technical, but it's so important. The proposal also wants to fix the annual cost of living adjustment, the COLA. Right now, it's calculated based on what younger working people spend, but seniors spend way more on things like healthcare, right? So this plan would switch to a new formula, the CPIE, that actually reflects what seniors spend their money on. In simple terms, it would likely mean bigger, more realistic benefit increases each year. All right, next up, we're shifting gears to look at some proposed reforms for Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. And for folks on SSI, the changes we're about to talk about are, well, they're even more dramatic. Supporters say this is about restoring the original promise of the program. So right now, the maximum federal SSI benefit is around $943 a month. The problem, that's actually below the federal poverty line. This SSI Restoration Act would raise that benefit to over $1,250. That's a jump of more than $300 a month, and it's designed specifically to lift people out of poverty. But it's not just about the monthly check. These reforms also try to fix some really old rules that, frankly, just don't make sense anymore. And one of the biggest ones is something called the marriage penalty. You're not going to believe this, but under the current rules, if two people on SSI get married, their combined benefit is actually cut by about $471 a month. I mean, think about that. It forces people to choose between their relationship and their financial survival. The proposal? It's simple. It gets rid of that penalty completely. And here's another rule that feels like it's stuck in the past, the asset limit. Right now, a person on SSI can't have more than $2,000 in assets. That limit hasn't been updated since 1984. The proposal would raise it to $10,000, which would let people actually save up a real emergency fund for when life happens.
Okay, so beyond those direct benefit boosts, there's a third major proposal in the mix. It's called the Social Security 2100 Act, and it takes a much broader look at the whole system. It's about strengthening Social Security for decades to come, while also making some really important tweaks to benefits and taxes.
First off, it focuses on people who worked their whole lives in really essential but low-wage jobs. This act would create a new, higher minimum benefit. The bottom line is, if you have 30 years of work under your belt, you'd be guaranteed a retirement benefit that's actually above the poverty line. And second, this is a big one. It would mean a pretty significant tax cut for a lot of beneficiaries. Under this plan, if you're single and your total income is under $50,000 a year, or if you're married and it's under $100,000, you wouldn't have to pay any federal income tax on your benefits. Now, to pay for all this, the act would also have the Social Security payroll tax apply to earners over $400,000.
Okay, that was a lot of information, I know. We've talked about the Expansion Act, the SSI Restoration Act, and the 2100 Act. So what happens when you start to put all these pieces of the puzzle together? What could life actually look like?
See, these proposals aren't necessarily an either-or situation. You can think of them as different layers of a much stronger financial safety net. You've got the extra $200 a month from the Expansion Act, you've got the huge upgrades to SSI, and the tax cuts from the 2100 Act. And there's actually one more piece that's been talked about for some more immediate help. On top of all those permanent changes, there has also been serious discussion about a one-time stimulus payment of $1,400. This would be for immediate relief, money to help people finally catch up on those past due bills, handle a major car repair, or get some medical care they've had to put off. This table really brings it all home. The goal of all these proposals is to create a massive shift from a life where you're just struggling to get by to one with real stability. Moving from a world where covering the basics is a daily fight to one where the bills get paid with less stress, where you can actually have a cushion for the unexpected, and where you can look to the future with some security. And that gets us back to the ultimate goal here. Yeah, the numbers are important. That extra money could be a game changer, but the intended impact goes so much deeper. It's about lifting that heavy weight of constant financial stress, which we all know can impact your health, your sleep, your relationships, everything. So, we'll leave you with this to think about. Now, it's super important to remember these are all just proposals for now. They have a long way to go before becoming law, but they do paint a picture of a very different future, one where retirement and disability don't have to mean poverty and stress, but instead could mean the security and dignity that their supporters believe everyone truly deserves.
So are we getting another stimulus check? Come on, it's the question that's on everybody's mind, right? Especially if you're on a fixed income. But what if I told you the answer isn't buried in politics? It's actually hidden in plain sight, in the economic data. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and find the one key trigger that actually makes these checks a reality.
This is the big one. It's the question we're all asking. After everything we've been through, it just feels like everyone is wondering when, or even if, more help is ever going to be on the way. Well, instead of just guessing, we're going to look at the exact same signals the people in charge are watching. It's time to see what might really be coming over the horizon.
Okay, so before we can look ahead, we have to get one really important thing straight. And, it might not be what you want to hear, but believe me, understanding this is the absolute most critical piece of the entire puzzle.
And here it is. The bottom line is, it doesn't matter how many petitions get signed or how loudly people demand more help, none of that directly triggers a stimulus check. The one thing, the only thing that acts as the catalyst is the health of the U.S. economy. Period.
Now look, I know that might sound a little discouraging at first, but it's actually the complete opposite. It's empowering. It means we can stop getting caught up in all the political noise and start looking at the real data, the same stuff the policymakers are looking at. It changes everything from just, hoping for help to actually understanding the conditions that make that help necessary.
So, if it's all about the economy, what are those conditions? What should we be looking for? Well, this brings us right to the heart of what we're talking about today, the economic trigger. Let's break down exactly how this thing works. The key idea here is something called an inverse correlation. Now, don't let the fancy term fool you. It's actually super simple. Just think of a seesaw, right? When one side goes up, the other side has to go down. It's the same here. When the health of the economy goes down, the chances of the government sending out stimulus checks goes up. They move in opposite directions. Simple as that. Think about it. When the economy is just humming along, jobs are everywhere, businesses are growing, there's basically zero chance of stimulus. And why would there be? You don't need to stimulate an economy that's already running hot. But when things start to slow down, when the economy looks like it's heading for a recession, that's when the whole conversation in Washington completely changes. So what exactly should you be watching for? Well, here are the big 4 signals. First, rising unemployment claims. That's a big one. When more people are losing their jobs, it's a clear sign of trouble. Then you've got slowing growth and contracting business activity, which just means companies are making less and selling less. But honestly, the real flashing red light to watch for is the Federal Reserve. When they start cutting interest rates, you need to pay attention. They only do that when they see big trouble on the horizon and want to make it cheaper to borrow money to get things going again. These are the headlines that truly matter.
And look, this isn't just some theory somebody came up with. The data shows a crystal clear, repeating pattern throughout recent American history. It's kind of undeniable once you see it.
Let that sink in for a second. Every single major recession in the modern era has led to stimulus checks. That tells us that these payments aren't random acts of kindness. They're a standard, almost predictable response to a specific crisis, a major economic downturn. The playbook is there, and they've used it again and again.
Let's just walk through it. Back in 2001, the dot-com bubble burst, and we had a recession. The response? $300 checks. Okay. 7 years later, 2008, the housing market completely collapses, triggering a massive global crisis. The response? $600 checks. Then, of course, 2020, the pandemic shuts down the entire world. The response? $1,200 checks. Are you seeing the pattern here? A major recession hits, and boom, payments go out. It has happened every single time.
But hold on, because if we look just a little bit closer at those numbers, something even more interesting and kind of wild starts to pop out. It's not just that they sent checks, it's the amount of money that tells a whole other story. Okay, so the first time, in 2001, the baseline was set, $300.
Then in 2008, when the next big crisis hit, what happened? The amount exactly doubled to $600. And in 2020, you already know where this is going. It doubled again to $1,200.
I mean, come on, that's not a coincidence. That is a clear mathematical pattern playing out over 2 decades. Each payment was literally double the one that came before it.
All right, so now we're armed with the two biggest clues. We know about the economic trigger, and we've seen this incredible historical pattern. So what can we reasonably guess about what might be coming next?
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If we were to face another major recession in the near future, would the people in charge stick to this exact same doubling pattern that's held true for more than 20 years?
Well, if you just follow the math to its next logical step, you double $1,200 and you get $2,400. Now, let's be crystal clear about this. This is not a prediction. It's just pointing out a very curious historical trend. But it is a fascinating pattern to think about, isn't it?
All of this really leads to one powerful, simple takeaway. If you want to have a real idea of what's coming, you can pretty much ignore the political shouting matches. The real answers are in the jobs reports, the GDP numbers, and what the Federal Reserve is doing. You now know exactly what to look for, the real signs that history shows us come right before these payments.
And here's one final crucial warning. When these things happen, they happen fast. I mean, think back to early 2020. In February, everything seemed pretty normal. By March, the entire world had changed. And by April, checks were already on their way. The shift from a stable economy to a crisis can happen in just a few weeks. When the dominoes start to fall, they fall quickly.
So, when you put it all together, history seems to show us that a major stimulus payment isn't really a question of if, but a question of when a recession forces the government's hand. The focus shifts away from waiting for politicians to make an announcement and toward watching the economy itself. So the real question I have for you is, now that you know what to look for, what economic signs will you be watching?
You know, there's a question that just keeps popping up, and I see it everywhere. Are we going to get a fourth stimulus check? It's a huge topic online, and honestly, for very good reason. So today, we're going to cut through all that noise and really look at what the economy itself is telling us. So let's just get right to it. This is the question on everybody's mind. And listen, while there's tons of speculation out there, the real answer isn't buried in some political headline. Nope. It's found in the economic data. And that's not an exaggeration. We're talking about this today because for millions of people who are really feeling the financial squeeze, this isn't just some abstract idea. It's a very real daily concern. So let's try to get some real clarity. All right, here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with what actually triggers these payments. Then we'll look at a pretty surprising pattern from the past. After that, we'll zero in on the one economic number you need to keep an eye on. And finally, we'll talk about why the next stimulus might look totally different from the last one. Okay, first things first. What actually causes a stimulus check to happen in the first place? It's not random, and it's not just politics. It is a direct, calculated response to one specific event, an economy that's gotten sick. And when we say the economy is sick, we're really talking about a recession. That's the official word for it, right? A major, widespread, and kind of prolonged downturn that hits everything and everyone, from big corporations to your local coffee shop. And this right here is the core idea we need to understand. If you just look back at the last couple of decades, the pattern is crystal clear. Every single major recession has been followed by stimulus checks. Every single time. It's basically become a standard move in the modern economic playbook. Here's a great way to think about it. Imagine the economy is a patient. A recession? That's when the patient gets seriously ill. The lawmakers are the doctors, and their go-to prescription is a big old injection of cash. That's the stimulus, to try and get the patient back up and running. And it makes sense, right? The sicker the patient, the bigger the dose of medicine they're going to need. So let's dig into that history a little bit, because when you actually examine the numbers from past recessions, well, a really fascinating and maybe even predictive pattern starts to show up. Okay, check this out. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the check was for $300. Then in 2008, during that massive financial crisis, it doubled to $600. And then in 2020, with the pandemic, it doubled again to $1,200. Are you seeing the pattern here? Now, if you just follow that doubling logic, the next number in that sequence would be around $2,400. But, and I have to be super clear about this is just an observation of a historical trend. It is absolutely not a guarantee. The actual amount of any future check would depend completely on how severe the economic downturn is at the time. So if a sick economy is the trigger, how do we know when it's sick enough for the doctors to step in? Well, there's one key health report that we can all look at. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it's simply called the jobs report. And inside this report, there are a few vital signs. You've got the headline number, the unemployment rate. But just as important is jobs created or lost. Are companies hiring, or are they laying people off? The labor participation rate tells us how many people are even trying to find a job. And average hourly earnings shows if our paychecks are keeping pace with inflation. Altogether, they paint a pretty clear picture of our economic health. So when you start to see that businesses, from the giant corporations all the way down to your local pizzeria, are slowing down their hiring, or worse, starting to let people go, that is a massive warning flare for the whole economy. It means people aren't spending as much, companies are getting nervous, and the whole economic engine is starting to sputter. That is the signal that gets lawmakers to scramble and start seriously talking about what they need to do. But, and this is really important, if they do act again, there's a good chance it won't be a carbon copy of last time. The whole strategy could shift to something much more targeted. See, the last few checks were broad. They went out to a massive chunk of the population. A targeted strategy is different. It would focus laser-like on low-income and fixed-income households. Why? Because those are the folks most likely to spend the money immediately and pump it right back into the economy. This gives you way more bang for your buck, and it does it with less risk of driving up inflation for everybody else. So the big takeaway here is this. We might need to adjust our expectations. If and when another stimulus package comes along, it could be designed very, very differently. Maybe aimed at a smaller group of people to get the maximum economic impact with the fewest negative side effects.
Okay, so let's just trace that path one more time. It starts with an economic contraction. We see it in those bad jobs reports. That triggers the lawmakers' scramble, where they have to respond. Then a stimulus package is passed, and finally, the payments are distributed with one single goal: to get spent right away and kickstart the economy.
So that brings us to the final thought. Based on modern history, it really doesn't seem to be a matter of if the government will intervene in the next major recession. The real question is, how sick does the economy have to get before they open up that playbook once again? That's what we'll all be watching.
You know, remember those stimulus checks we all got a few years back? For some people, they were an absolute lifeline. For others, well, they were a nice little bonus. A really fascinating new study is asking a powerful question. What if we could have gotten a much, much bigger economic boost, but for a fraction of the cost? The answer, it turns out, lies in getting the money to the right people and doing it in a totally different way. So let's break down this idea for what might just be a smarter stimulus.
Okay, so let's get right to the heart of it. The proposal this study makes is for a recurring $2,000 monthly check. But wait, this isn't some money for everyone idea. Not at all. The entire strategy really hinges on who gets this check, and the data suggests that being super precise is the key to making it all work. So to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to walk through 4 key parts. First, we'll look back at the stimulus dilemma from 2020 and 2021. Then, we'll uncover a key economic clue that is absolutely central to this new idea. After that, we'll compare the economic impact of spenders versus savers. And finally, we'll explore all the details of this proposal for a smarter stimulus.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the stimulus dilemma. You know, to figure out where we might be going, we first have to really understand where we've been. So let's take a look back at the lessons we learned from that last big round of stimulus payments.
So between 2020 and 2021, the government pushed out 3 big waves of stimulus checks, and the total price tag? A pretty staggering $850 billion. I mean, that's more than the entire economy of some countries. The whole goal was to jumpstart our economy, but a price tag that big raises a really important question. Did that money actually get spent in the right places, or did we kind of miss the mark?
Well, here were the core problems with that old approach. The checks went out to about 85% of the population. That means a huge chunk of that money went to people who, frankly, didn't really need it for their immediate expenses. Economists have a name for this. They call it the helicopter approach, just kind of dumping money across the landscape and hoping for the best. And the result? Well, not only was it super inefficient, but some studies suggest it added about 3 percentage points to the inflation that came later. There just had to be a better way.
And that leads us right into our second section, a key economic clue. See, researchers who are analyzing all this data found a secret to making stimulus way more effective. And it all comes down to understanding one simple but really powerful economic principle.
That principle is called the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. Now, don't let the name fool you. It sounds really academic, but it's an incredibly simple idea. It just measures one thing. When you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you actually spend and how much do you save? That's the whole concept right there.
Let's just boil it all the way down. Forget the jargon for a second. NPC is really just asking this one simple question. How likely are you to spend the next dollar you get? That's it. And this simple question, it turns out, is the key to unlocking a much more effective stimulus strategy.
So this concept basically creates two very distinct groups of people. You've got folks with a high MPC. They're typically on lower incomes, so an extra dollar is very likely to be spent immediately on necessities. Then you have people with a low MPC. They're usually on higher incomes, so that extra dollar is way more likely to be saved or invested. Simply put, the less of a financial cushion you have, the more likely you are to spend new money right away. And that distinction, well, it changes everything.
Okay, so let's move on to Section 3 and see how this all connects. Spenders versus savers. Now that we understand what MPC is, let's actually apply it. Let's follow the money and see what happens when we give the same amount of cash to people on opposite ends of that spectrum.
Let's use that core member from the study, $2,000. Now, imagine two of these checks are sent out. One goes to a spender, someone with a high MPC. The other one goes to a saver, someone with a low MPC. The amount of money is exactly the same, but where it goes next tells two completely different stories about the economy.
The data for the person with the high MPC is pretty striking. When this person gets that $2,000, the vast majority of it, about $1,600, is spent within just 10 days. The rest of it, gone within a month. This means the entire amount gets injected directly back into the economy, buying groceries, paying rent, supporting local businesses. This is stimulus in its absolute purest form.
And you know, this is the perfect time for a little reality check. The whole purpose of a stimulus check is right there in the name, to stimulate. It's not designed to be a savings plan or a debt reduction tool. Its only job is to get money moving through the economy, to keep everything going. Spending isn't a side effect of the program, it's the entire point.
So what happens when that same $2,000 check goes to a person with a low MPC, the saver? Well, the study found that they generally don't spend much of it at all. That money gets saved, or invested, or used to pay down a mortgage. From an economic stimulus perspective, that money is effectively taken right out of circulation. The source uses this great analogy. It's hoarded like a bunch of squirrels saving away nuts for the winter. And while saving is an amazing personal habit, it totally defeats the purpose of an economic stimulus.
So the crucial point is this. When the whole goal is to kickstart the economy, the government isn't looking for savers. It's looking for spenders. It needs people who will take that money and immediately put it right back into the system. And this is why that distinction between high and low MPC isn't just some academic theory. It's the absolute key to making a program like this work.
And this brings us to our final section, a smarter stimulus. Based on everything we've just laid out, the study proposes a completely different, much more targeted approach for the next time a major economic downturn happens. So here's the proposed model. Step 1, instead of that blanket helicopter approach, you surgically identify only the high MPC individuals. Step 2, you replace the one-off check with a sustained monthly payment. And the result is this amazing 1-2 punch. You get way more economic stimulation for every single dollar you spend, and you avoid that massive $850 billion price tag of the old method.
The benefits of this kind of model are really clear. The money goes directly to the people who need it the most and who will actually go out and spend it. This gives you a much bigger economic bang for your buck at a fraction of the total cost. And maybe the biggest shift here is moving from that one-time payment to sustained support, replacing what one person called a payment that was cool for 3 minutes with a predictable lifeline that can last for months.
So this all brings us to the final question. This model suggests we can have a stimulus that is cheaper, more effective, and much more targeted to the people who need help. It's a really powerful idea, and it's backed by a lot of data. The real question is, when the next economic crisis hits, will policymakers stick with that old helicopter approach, or will they be willing to embrace a smarter, more precise strategy? What we learned from the last crisis might just be the key to navigating the next one.
You've probably seen the headlines buzzing around. Something about a new payment for Social Security recipients? Well, we're going to break down exactly what that's all about. It's a proposal that's getting a ton of attention, and we need to talk about what it could actually mean for millions of people. Okay, let's get right into it.
Okay, so the number at the absolute center of this whole conversation is this, $1,400. And look, this isn't just some random figure pulled out of a hat. It is the exact amount at the heart of a new proposal aimed squarely at people on Social Security.
So what is this really? Well, there's a pretty influential advocacy group called the Senior Citizens League, and they're the ones pushing for what they call a one-time catch-up payment. Now, the key thing to understand right away is that this is not a permanent monthly increase. Nope. It's designed as a special, one-shot payment to give folks some immediate relief.
But that leads to the big question, right? Why now? I mean, a proposal for a payment this big, it doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It's pointing to a much, much deeper problem that advocates say has been brewing for years. So let's dig into the why behind this whole thing.
And really, the entire argument. It all comes down to one thing: the cost of living gap. Basically, there's this growing sense that the money seniors are getting just isn't keeping up with what things actually cost day to day. And that gap is getting dangerous.
So to really get a handle on this gap, we've got to talk about COLA, the cost of living adjustment. It's that annual raise that Social Security recipients get. And its whole job, its only job, is to make sure your benefits can buy the same amount of stuff this year as they did last year, even when prices go up. On paper, it's supposed to be a perfect system.
But in the real world, is it working? Well, according to people like Shannon Benton from the Senior Citizens League, the answer is a big no. She talks about a sharp erosion in what people can actually buy. She's arguing that those yearly COLA raises just aren't keeping up with the soaring costs of essentials. We're talking food, housing, and a big one, healthcare.
And listen, this gap is a huge deal because of just how much people depend on these benefits. I mean, look at this. For almost 40% of folks, Social Security isn't just some of their income, it's all of it. It's their entire income. So for that group, when the COLA doesn't cut it, there's literally no other safety net. That's it.
Okay, so if we all agree the COLA isn't quite doing its job, the obvious next question is why? What's broken? And that question takes us right into the really technical, nerdy heart of this whole debate. It's all about a disagreement over the formula, the math used to figure out inflation for seniors.
Let's break this down, because it can get a little confusing. Right now, the COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. Now, this index looks at what urban workers are buying. Things like gas for the commute, new clothes for the office. But here's the problem. Advocates say seniors spend their money completely differently. They spend way less on gas and way, way more on things like healthcare. So they want to switch to a different index, the CPIE, which is specifically designed to track spending for the elderly. It gives a lot more weight to those crucial costs.
And you might be thinking, is this just some niche idea? Not even close. When the Senior Citizens League actually surveyed retirees, the support for this change was just overwhelming. I mean, look at that number. A staggering 96% of the people they asked said, yes, the COLA should absolutely be based on how we actually spend our money.
And the numbers behind that feeling are pretty grim. You've got 1 in 5 seniors spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare alone. 4 out of 5 feel like the official inflation numbers are a joke and don't match what they see at the grocery store. And then there's this. 13% of seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's often below the poverty line. It's a tough reality. So this idea of a one-time payment, it might sound kind of radical, right? But if you look back at our history, it's actually not a completely new concept. This whole conversation is really just the latest chapter in a long story of adjusting benefits when times get tough economically.
Yeah, I mean, this idea definitely builds on stuff we've seen before. Remember the Great Recession back in 2009? Social Security recipients got $250 checks then. And just a few years ago, there was a big push for a $200 a month increase. And of course, we all remember the stimulus checks, the economic impact payments during the pandemic. So you see, the idea of sending targeted direct cash, it's been done.
So history shows us it's possible, right? The government can step in and send direct help when things get bad. But, and this is a big but, it's really important to remember that just because it happened before doesn't mean it'll happen again. Every single proposal, including this one, has to fight its own battle through the current political and economic climate.
Okay, so we've covered the what, the $1,400 payment, we've covered the why, the COLA gap, and we've looked at the history. Now let's pull it all together. Where does this proposal actually stand today? And, let's be honest, what are its chances of happening?
You really have to understand how something like this becomes a reality. It's a journey. Right now, we are at the very beginning, steps 1 and 2. You have an advocacy group making a suggestion, and the media is talking about it. That's great. But for this to turn into actual money in someone's bank account, it needs to become a bill. That bill has to pass the House, and it has to pass the Senate. Then it has to be signed by the president. That is a very, very long and tricky road.
All right, so let's boil this whole thing down. What are the most important things to remember? Number 1, and this is the big one, this is just a proposal. It is not a law. Number 2, it's designed for all Social Security recipients. That means retirement, SSI, and SSDI. 3, the whole argument is that the current COLA formula is broken because it doesn't reflect what seniors actually spend money on. And finally, number 4, the fix they're suggesting has 2 parts. Change the formula for the future and give everyone a one-time payment to make up for the past. That's the whole shebang.
And all of this really leaves us with a much bigger, more fundamental question to think about. I mean, this whole $1,400 idea, it's just one possible answer to a huge challenge. As our economy keeps changing and the cost of everything keeps changing, how do we make sure our most important safety nets, things like Social Security, are changing right along with it? That's the real conversation, and it's one we're definitely going to be having for a long, long time.
You know, if you try to keep up with the news about Social Security, wow, it's a lot. One minute you hear about benefit cuts, and the next it's all about increases. It can make your head spin, right? So in this explainer, we're going to slice through all that confusion. We'll get right to the facts, separating what's actually happening right now from what's just being proposed for the future.
All right, let's just ask the big question right up front. Is Social Security sending you more money? Well, the answer's a little complicated. For some people, yes, and for others, it's still a big debate. There's one major change that's already law and has led to significant payouts for a specific group of people. For everyone else, there are other big ideas on the table. Our goal today is to show you exactly what's what.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. Now we're looking ahead to what's on the horizon. Let's dive into some other big legislative proposals that could mean more money for a lot more people down the road.
Right now, there are really 2 big ideas floating around for a future raise. On one side, you have the Social Security Expansion Act, a proposal from Senator Bernie Sanders. It's pretty straightforward. Give everybody on Social Security an extra $200 a month, and to pay for it, raise taxes on the highest earners. On the other side is a more targeted approach. The idea here is to send those extra checks only to the lowest income beneficiaries. The theory is that they're the most likely to spend that money right away, giving the economy a more immediate jolt.
And just to put that first idea into real numbers, an extra $200 a month comes out to $2,400 a year. That would be a serious increase for every single person receiving benefits. But, and it's so important to remember this is still just a proposal. It has not been passed into law.
Okay, let's shift gears completely. There's a whole other vision for how to improve Social Security, and this one has nothing to do with passing new laws for benefit raises. Instead, it's all about making the system stronger from the inside out through better management and different tax policies.
And you can really see this viewpoint summed up in this quote from former President Donald Trump. He says, "I signed one big, beautiful bill and allowed no tax on Social Security for our great seniors." So for this approach, the key isn't necessarily bigger checks from the government, but letting seniors keep more of the money they already have by cutting taxes on their benefits.
So, wow, we've covered a lot of ground and some very different ideas for what's next. Let's try to pull this all together and figure out, what does this all mean for the future of your benefits?
Okay, so when you boil it all down, there are really 3 distinct paths we've looked at. First, you have the Fairness Act. The status on that one is confirmed law, and it's already providing back pay and raises for that specific group affected by WEP and GPO. Then you have the 2 big future ideas. There's the legislative path, passing new laws to raise monthly checks for lots of people, and then there's the administrative vision, which is all about strengthening the system from within through efficiency and tax cuts.
And really, that brings us to the ultimate question, doesn't it? Bigger checks versus a stronger system. What's the right path forward? Should the main goal be getting more money into people's pockets every month to deal with the rising cost of living? Or should the priority be on creating a more efficient, streamlined, and fiscally sound system for the long haul? There's no easy answer, but whatever we decide will define the future of Social Security for tens of millions of Americans.
Today, we are really getting into the weeds on the future of supplemental security income, SSI. There are some huge proposals out there that could completely change the game for millions of people. We're talking bigger monthly checks and a massive jump in how much you're allowed to save. But when you peel back all the layers, all these proposals really come down to one single critical question. Is SSI, as it stands today, actually keeping up with the cost of living? This is the core problem we're going to unpack, because for almost 8 million people, the answer to that question really dictates their entire life. So let's just step back for a second. SSI was created, over 50 years ago, and it had a super clear mission: to be a financial safety net. It was designed to fight poverty, and for a while, it did its job. But over the years, a gap started to appear, and that gap has just kept growing, leaving the whole program and the people who rely on it falling further and further behind.
Okay, so just to make sure we're all on the same page, what exactly is SSI? It's a really important federal program run by the Social Security Administration that gives a monthly income to adults and kids with disabilities, and also to folks 65 and older who have very little in terms of income and resources.
And this right here is the absolute key to its original design. The whole idea from day one was that the payments would keep people right at the federal poverty line. Not way above it, sure, but definitely not below it. It was supposed to be a floor, a baseline of financial stability. And remembering that original goal is so important for understanding where things are today.
So this idea of falling behind, it isn't just a feeling. It's not a hunch that things are getting tougher. It is a measurable, quantifiable gap. And the numbers, well, they tell a really, really clear story about the difference between the program's original promise and today's reality.
Okay, let's start with the benchmark. For 2025, the official federal poverty line for one person is $15,650 a year. But nobody pays their rent once a year, right? So let's break that down by month. That comes out to $1,304. Remember that number. It's our baseline. Now let's look at what's actually happening for someone on SSI. The absolute maximum federal payment a single person can get in 2025 is $967 a month. That's the ceiling. You can't get a dollar more from the federal government. So right off the bat, you can see those two numbers are not the same. And when you put those two numbers right next to each other, like in this chart, wow, the gap just jumps right out at you. It's not even close. The maximum benefit falls way short of that poverty line, and this difference has just been getting worse year after year. So do the math. The difference is $337. That's the hole people find themselves in every single month. To put it another way, the maximum SSI check is nearly 35% below the very poverty line it was created to meet. That is a massive gap to cover when you're on a fixed income.
Okay, so that's the problem. It's a big one. But how do you fix it? Well, there are some pretty concrete plans being floated around. And maybe the biggest one is a piece of legislation called the SSI Restoration Act. It's designed to attack that income shortfall we just talked about head-on.
And this proposal is getting a lot of attention. In the source material we looked at, one analyst put it pretty bluntly, saying the SSI Restoration Act, in my opinion, is a really, really good one. It checks literally all the boxes. So it's seen as this complete fix, not just some tiny little patch.
So what are these boxes that it checks? Well, first and foremost, the Act wants to raise monthly benefits to 100% of the federal poverty line. That means, boom, an instant $337 a month raise for someone getting the max benefit. And this part is crucial. It would then tie or index those benefits so they automatically go up with the poverty line every year. That way, this gap can never open up again. The Act also tackles the marriage penalty, which can hurt married couples, and it wants to seriously raise those ancient asset limits, which we're going to talk about next.
Okay, reality check time. This is really, really important to understand. The SSI Restoration Act is still just a proposal. Right now, it has not been passed by Congress. It's been introduced, it's being talked about, but it is not the law of the land.
But, a bigger check is only half the story. There's another huge problem that's kind of baked into the system right now, and it has everything to do with saving money. Okay, so the asset limits for SSI, that's how much money you can have saved up, are stuck in a time warp. They haven't been updated in decades. Right now, the limit for one person is just $2,000. I mean, think about that. Your car breaks down, your fridge dies, you have one unexpected medical bill, that can wipe you out completely. It basically makes it impossible to build any kind of real safety net.
So the proposed fix for this is, well, it's dramatic. The asset limit for an individual would jump from $2,000 all the way up to $10,000. And for a couple, it would go from $3,000 to $20,000. I mean, that is a night and day difference. Let's just pause on that individual number for a second. Going from $2,000 to $10,000, that's a 500% increase. We are not talking about a small tweak here. This is a massive shift in policy. basically admitting that the financial world of today is nothing like it was when these old limits were set. And what does that really mean for someone's life? It's not just about the numbers, it's about security. It's about having that peace of mind that comes from knowing you have a rainy day fund. It means you could actually save for an emergency without that constant fear of losing the very benefits you need to survive.
Okay, so we've got these two huge ideas on the table, one to boost monthly income and one to raise the savings limit. But what does it all mean? How does a plan like this go from being an idea to being a reality?
Well, it all comes down to the process in Washington. First, lawmakers have to introduce the bills, which, yep, they've already done. After that, the bills have to get debated in committees and then eventually get voted on by both the House and the Senate. If, and that's a big if, a bill passes, then it goes to the Social Security Administration to actually put the changes into effect. But it's key to remember where we are right now. These are all still just proposals on paper.
All right, so let's just do a quick recap of the whole shebang. We're talking about 4 big things. 1, bigger checks, with that $337 monthly boost to get up to the poverty line. 2, higher savings with that 500% jump in the asset limit. 3, fairer rules, getting rid of that penalty for married couples. And 4, future-proofing the system by tying benefits to the poverty line so this whole mess never happens again.
When you step back and look at it, these proposals are really a total rethinking of what SSI is and what it does. They're trying to bring it back to its original promise of being a real anti-poverty safety net. But the million-dollar question remains, is there enough political will to make these big plans a new reality for the millions of Americans who rely on it? And that's what we'll all be watching.
Okay, let's talk about a pretty wild idea. What if every single person on Social Security got the exact same check every month? I mean, not based on how much you earned during your career, but just one flat amount for everyone. It's a really radical proposal, and it's starting to get some serious attention because it would completely transform one of the country's most important programs. So let's dive in and really unpack what this is all about.
Right now, the system is the complete opposite of flat. It's all over the place. You've got some folks on one end getting as little as, say, $50 or $60 a month, and then on the other extreme, the maximum possible benefit is over $5,000. That is a gigantic gap, and it's really the core issue that's fueling this whole conversation.
So, before we can really get the logic behind this flat benefit idea, we've got to first understand this huge divide in the current system. It's kind of like a tale of 2 different programs.
And look, this isn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. This disparity has very real, very human consequences. Right now, there are about 11 million seniors in the U.S. living below the federal poverty line, and a lot of them depend on Social Security. That one number alone just shows you how high the stakes are here.
Yeah, that maximum benefit, the one around $5,000, it gets a lot of attention. But the reality for most people, it's nowhere close to that. The average retirement benefit is actually just under $2,000. And if you're on disability, SSDI, the average is even lower, just a bit under $1,600. So this chart really shows you the vast majority of people are a long, long way from that top payment.
This quote from one of the sources we looked at just hits the nail on the head. It talks about this massive bifurcation. And that's exactly what it is, a system split in 2, where some people are getting just a few dollars, while others are getting thousands. This is the problem the flat benefit idea is trying to solve.
So what's the big idea to fix this divide? Well, it's to completely flatten the whole system, to create one single universal benefit amount that every single qualified person would get every single month.
And the number that's being talked about is around $2,200 a month. Now that number wasn't just picked out of a hat. It's what they've calculated as the equilibrium point, the spot where the high-end and low-end benefits would eventually meet in the middle.
So how would we even get there? I mean, you can't just flip a switch overnight. The whole idea is that it would be a gradual process. You'd be systematically raising the payments for people at the bottom, while at the same time, you're slowly lowering the payments for people at the very top until everybody eventually lands on that same flat number.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like a massive, complicated undertaking. So how would a change this huge actually work in practice? Let's get into the mechanics.
It really breaks down into about 4 main steps. First, you start to phase down those high-end benefits over several years. A really key part of this is step 2. You'd stop giving the annual cost of living adjustments, the COLAs, to the highest earners. Step 3, All the money you save from that gets rerouted. And finally, step 4, you use those funds to boost up all the low-end benefits until they hit that target equilibrium point.
Now, a really big piece of this whole debate is the timeline. How long would this take? Is it a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan, maybe even 15 years or more? The source material shows there are different schools of thought on this. And it matters, because the longer the timeline, the higher that final flat benefit is likely to be, just because of inflation and economic growth over time.
And there are a couple of different ways to actually bring those high-end benefits down. One idea is a simple annual deduction. You just trim their benefit by, say, 5% each year. The other, maybe a slightly gentler way to do it, is to just freeze their benefits by taking away their yearly COLA. That means their payment just wouldn't keep up with inflation anymore, and its real value would slowly decrease.
You know, if a plan like this actually happened, it would be so much more than just a tweak to payment amounts. It would fundamentally change the entire purpose and identity of Social Security as we know it.
What this would do is basically turn Social Security into something that looks a lot like a guaranteed basic income, or GBI. And the idea behind a GBI is pretty simple. Everyone who qualifies gets the same recurring payment. It creates a true financial floor that no one can fall beneath.
And this really gets to the philosophical heart of the whole thing. It would shift Social Security from being an earned benefit, where what you get out is tied to what you put in, to a system of universal support, where you get the benefits simply because you're a qualified citizen or resident. It's a huge change in thinking.
The potential results here are pretty massive. I mean, on the one hand, a move like this could lift millions of seniors and people with disabilities out of poverty. It would give them a stable, predictable income. It would also make the super complex Social Security formulas way, way simpler. But maybe most importantly, it forces us all to have a conversation about what we want Social Security to be in the 21st century.
Let's just boil it all down and put these two systems side by side. Right now, your benefit is based on your earnings history. In the new proposal, it's based on just being a citizen or resident. The benefit amount goes from totally variable to completely flat, and the main goal of the program itself actually shifts from replacing your income to preventing poverty, period.
So when you get right down to it, this whole debate makes us ask a really fundamental question about one of our most important institutions. Should Social Security be an earned benefit that you're entitled to based on your work, or should it be a guaranteed safety net for absolutely everyone? How we answer that question will really define its future.
Today, we're jumping into a really interesting idea that could totally change how we look at financial support, especially when times get tough. It's all about asking, is there a smarter way to help people out? I mean, you feel it, I feel it, we all feel it, right? The price of just about everything seems to be going up and up. It puts a real squeeze on your wallet, and that leads us to a huge question. With costs climbing like this, is there a better, more intelligent way to provide some relief?
And that right there is the heart of the problem. We've all seen prices jump, but for a lot of people, especially folks on Social Security or other fixed incomes, the money coming in just isn't keeping up with the money going out. So we're going to look at one idea that's designed to fix that exact problem.
So what is this new idea all about? Well, because of all the economic challenges we've seen, experts are talking about a pretty major shift in how we handle this stuff. It's a much more targeted approach, and it's really different from what we've done in the past.
The big number at the center of this whole proposal is $2,000. And no, not just as a one-off payment, but as a regular monthly check. This is the number that supporters think could offer some real, consistent help.
Okay, so how would this thing actually play out? Well, the idea is for these ongoing monthly checks, but, and this is the key difference, they wouldn't go to everybody. They'd be aimed specifically at low and fixed income households. The whole goal is to give them immediate spending power to help them cover that gap that inflation has created.
But why do it this way? Why only target certain people? Well, it all boils down to the economics of how different people spend their money. And honestly, this is where the whole proposal gets really fascinating.
The key concept has this really fancy-sounding name, the marginal propensity to consume, or MPC. But don't let the name fool you, it's actually super simple. All it means is, when you get an extra dollar, how much of it do you spend and how fast do you spend it? This one idea is crucial to understanding the entire plan.
And when you look at the studies on this, it's pretty wild. When a lower-income household gets a $2,000 payment, they spend about 80% of it, that's $1,600, in the first 10 days. The rest of it, gone within the next month. That super fast spending is exactly what economists mean when they say someone has a high MPC.
And this just lays out the big difference, right? People with a high MPC, who are usually on lower incomes, spend new money almost immediately, often because they have to, for necessities.
On the flip side, folks with higher incomes, the low MPC group, are way more likely to save it, invest it, or pay off debt. That money doesn't get pumped back into the economy nearly as fast, if it even does at all.
So this brings us to a really important comparison. To really get why this new targeted idea is even on the table, we've got to look back at those big stimulus checks that went out in 2020 and 2021 and kind of learn from what happened.
The difference between these two plans is just night and day. The old stimulus went to about 85% of everyone. And look, the intention was good, but the absolutely massive cost was a big factor in the inflation we're all dealing with now. This new proposal is meant to be the exact opposite. Surgically targeted, way less expensive, and designed to give a focused boost to the economy without causing prices to spiral.
Okay, let's really zero in on that cost difference, because the numbers here tell you everything you need to know about why this new strategy is being considered.
Those widespread stimulus checks from a few years back, they cost around $850 billion. Just think about that number for a second. It's a staggering amount of money to push into the economy all at once.
Now compare that to the estimate for this new targeted idea. Giving 3 monthly checks of $2,000 to about 50 million people would cost around $100 billion. That's less than an eighth of the cost for what's argued to be a more direct and sustained impact.
So what does that really mean in practice? It means for a tiny fraction of the cost, this plan could give more consistent, ongoing help directly to the people who need it, all while trying to avoid that big inflationary wave that ends up hurting everybody in the long run.
And all of this leads to what a lot of the experts behind this idea are calling the win-win argument. It's a vision for a more focused, more efficient, and you could argue a fairer way to handle economic relief in the future.
So the argument really is that it's just a smarter way to do things. You're getting money straight to the people who will actually spend it, which gives you a much better bang for your buck in terms of stimulating the economy. And by learning from the past, the goal is to be more cost-effective and a lot fairer, especially to those whose incomes have fallen behind.
And in the end, it really does come back to this simple quote. The whole point of a stimulus check is for people to spend it. I mean, that's why it's called a stimulus. Giving it to people who are just going to park it in a savings account doesn't really achieve that goal. Giving it to the folks who'll spend it right away absolutely does.
Which, of course, leaves us with that one big question. When you look at the lessons from the past, and you follow the economic logic we've just walked through, could this kind of targeted approach be the future of financial relief? It's definitely a powerful idea to think about.
Today, we're diving into some really big proposals that could change the monthly benefits for millions of people who receive Supplemental Security Income, or SSI.
All right, let's start with this number. For 2025, the absolute maximum federal SSI benefit for a single person is $967 a month. That's the ceiling, the most anyone can get from the program each month.
And that brings us to the big question, right? With the cost of everything these days, rent, food, you name it, a lot of people are asking if that amount is really enough to get by.
So to really get what these proposals are all about, we first have to understand the problem they're trying to fix. And it really all comes down to a growing financial gap between SSI benefits and the official poverty level.
You know, it's interesting. When this program was created more than 50 years ago, the whole point was to act as a safety net, to keep people right at the federal poverty line. But over the decades, well, it's fallen behind.
And this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the max SSI benefit at $967. On the other, the 2025 federal poverty line, which is $1,304. You can literally see the gap right there.
And that difference comes out to $337. Every single month. That's the shortfall. And that number is at the absolute heart of this whole debate. You can really feel the urgency in this quote from our source material. I mean, that's pretty powerful language, and it just shows how strongly some people feel that the system needs to be modernized to close that gap.
Okay, so we've seen the problem. Now, what are the proposed solutions? Well, the first big one is a piece of legislation aimed squarely at closing that financial gap we just looked at.
It's called the SSI Restoration Act. You can basically think of it as a big package of updates trying to modernize parts of the program that, frankly, haven't been touched in decades. The single biggest, most significant change in this act would be to raise the maximum monthly benefit to match the federal poverty line. The goal is to get the program back to doing what it was originally intended to do.
So remember that $337 gap? this would close it. For someone getting the maximum benefit, this would mean a direct increase of $337 a month, bringing their total from $967 up to that poverty line figure of $1,304.
Now, this is absolutely critical to understand. This is a proposal. It's being discussed, but it has not been passed by Congress. It is not current law.
Okay, so the next big proposal tackles another part of the program that critics say is seriously out of date, the super strict limits on how much money a person can have in savings. These limits on assets, they haven't been updated for inflation in decades. This makes it almost impossible for people to save up even a small emergency fund for, a car repair or an unexpected bill.
And the proposed change here is huge. The asset limit for a single person would jump from the current $2,000 all the way up to $10,000.
And for married couples, the increase is just as dramatic. It would go from that long-standing $3,000 limit to a proposed $20,000.
To put that in perspective, for an individual, that's a 500% increase in how much they'd be allowed to save without being penalized or losing their benefits.
So, with such significant changes on the table, the natural question is, okay, what's the holdup? What's the current status of all this in Congress?
So just to sum it all up, the SSI Restoration Act is really this bundled package of reforms. It's trying to raise the benefits to the poverty line and also massively increase those savings limits, tackling the two major issues we've just covered. And this brings us to the bottom line. As of today, August 16th, 2025, the SSI Restoration Act has not passed. It is still just a proposal.
So that leaves us with a final thought for this explainer. When you look at that documented gap between the benefits and the poverty line and the fact that these rules haven't been updated in decades, it really makes you wonder, what level of priority should reforming SSI have on the national agenda?
There's a number that's been making a lot of noise lately. A number that could mean an extra $2,400 a year for every single person on Social Security. It's a huge proposal, sparking a ton of hope, but also a pretty fierce debate. So today, we're going to dig in and find out what's really going on.
You've probably seen the headlines, right? The posts on social media, the chatter online, a $2,400 boost to your annual Social Security check. But is this a real possibility we should be paying attention to, or is it just, political noise? Let's try to separate the facts from the fiction here. Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about the promise itself. We need to break down these numbers that have grabbed everyone's attention and figure out what they could actually mean for millions of American retirees. So, the big number at the heart of this whole thing is $2,400. That's the proposed annual increase that every Social Security recipient would see in their pocket. And let's be honest, in a time when the cost of everything from gas to groceries seems to be going up, a figure like that, well, it's no wonder it's capturing the public's imagination.
Now, what does a big annual number like that actually mean for your day-to-day life, for your budget? Well, if you break it down, it comes out to an extra $200 every single month. For a lot of folks, that's not just some small bonus. That could be a game changer. That could be the difference needed to cover utility bill, afford prescriptions, or just have a little more breathing room without all that financial stress. It's that monthly figure that makes this proposal feel so real and so appealing.
So where did this idea even come from? It's not just a number somebody pulled out of thin air. It's actually rooted in a formal piece of legislation that's making its way through Washington, D.C. right now.
The whole proposal comes from a bill called the Social Security Expansion Act. This is the official legislation that's been introduced in Congress, and its main goal is to make this increase a reality. And that's a really key point. This isn't just a talking point, it's a defined proposal with a very clear objective: boost benefits by $200 a month.
Of course, this immediately brings up the biggest question you can ask with any new spending. Who's going to pay for it? Well, the proposal's answer is to adjust the Social Security payroll tax cap. Right now, there's a ceiling on how much of a person's income gets taxed for Social Security. This act would raise that cap, or maybe even get rid of it altogether. That means high-income earners would end up contributing on a much, much larger portion of their earnings. As you can probably guess, this is one of the most controversial parts of the whole plan.
To really get a feel for the real-world impact, just look at the average person receiving benefits. Right now, their monthly check is around $1,800. With this boost, it would jump up to $2,000. That's about an 11% increase, which is pretty significant. And what this chart doesn't even show is that for people who are on minimum benefits, the impact would be proportionally even bigger. We're talking potentially life-changing.
Okay, so now we have to make a big shift from talking about what the proposal is to whether it could ever actually happen. Because while the idea of an extra $2,400 a year sounds fantastic, its path to becoming law is, to put it mildly, filled with some major political and economic roadblocks.
Yeah, the road to this becoming a law is incredibly steep. I mean, first, politically, it's facing just deep divisions in Congress. Fiscally, it runs headfirst into some really serious concerns about the long-term health of the entire Social Security system. And then you've got the logistical side, potential delays, these really complex questions about fairness between generations, and even unknown ripple effects on other government benefits. It's a lot to tackle.
Let's just break down the debate a little. On one hand, supporters argue, pretty passionately, that this boost is absolutely essential to help seniors keep up with the rising cost of living. They also say, hey, putting more money into the hands of 70 million people, that would be a huge stimulus for the economy. But on the other side, you've got critics raising all sorts of alarms. They're saying it's fiscally irresponsible, and they're worried that injecting billions of dollars into the economy could actually fuel inflation. They also bring up that concern that it puts an unfair financial burden on younger generations who have to foot the bill.
It's also really important to manage our expectations about timing. Even in the absolute best-case scenario, the journey from a proposal to an actual payment in your bank account is a long one. A bill gets introduced, then it faces this lengthy, often really contentious debate in Congress. It would almost certainly be changed and modified through compromises. Only after all of that, maybe, it gets approved. And even then, implementation would probably be phased in over time. The big takeaway here? No one should expect to see an extra $200 in their check anytime soon.
And you know, this quote from the source material really gets to the heart of the matter. This whole conversation we're having about a $2,400 boost is really a symptom of a much larger issue. The Social Security system as a whole is facing a crisis, and it desperately needs reform. The question isn't just about this one proposal, it's about how we're going to ensure the entire system stays solvent for our kids and grandkids.
Okay, so with all this uncertainty floating around, what does any of this mean for your own financial planning? Let's step beyond the headlines for a minute and focus on what you can actually control.
This is such a fundamental point, and it often gets lost in these kinds of debates. It's really worth remembering that when Social Security was first created, it was designed to be one part of a three-legged stool for retirement, right alongside personal savings and pensions. It was never ever meant to be the only source of income for retirees. And keeping that context in mind is absolutely essential for responsible financial planning.
Relying on political promises is a really risky strategy for something as critical as your retirement. Taking proactive control of your own financial security, that is the most reliable path forward no matter what happens in D.C.
You go online and it seems like everyone is talking about one thing. Is a fourth stimulus check on the way? Well, the real answer, it turns out, isn't a simple yes or no, and it's definitely not a date on a calendar. Today, we're going to dig in and figure out what actually needs to happen for another check to even be a possibility. Okay, so this is it, right? This is the big one, the question on everyone's mind, and it's especially critical if you're on a fixed income, Social Security, SSDI, VA benefits. That hope for another payment is really, really strong. But to get a real answer, we've got to look beyond the headlines and get a handle on the economic reality of the situation. And honestly, this is the most important idea to grasp. A stimulus check isn't some scheduled payment. It's not a holiday bonus. It's an emergency tool, like a fire extinguisher in a glass case. Lawmakers don't just wake up one day and decide to send out money. Something major has to happen to force their hand. So the question isn't when, it's why. And that why? It's all about the health of the U.S. economy. So what are these big economic triggers? If you look back, every major stimulus payment we've ever gotten has been a reaction to a crisis. It's never proactive. So to figure out what might be coming, we have to learn to watch the same economic vital signs that the folks in Washington are looking at. I love this analogy because it makes it so clear. When the economy, our patient, is healthy and doing well, you don't give it medicine, right? Of course not. But when it gets sick, when it slides into a recession, that's when lawmakers reach for the medicine cabinet. And that stimulus is the dose they use to try and get things moving again. The sicker the patient, well, the bigger the dose of medicine. Now, of all the vital signs they check, the job market is, without a doubt, the most critical. It's the big one. See, when people are working, money is flowing, the economy is humming along. But the second you see widespread layoffs and rising unemployment, that is a massive flashing red flag that the entire system is in trouble. That's the one thing that gets everyone's attention. And the way we measure this is with something called the official jobs report. You might hear it on the news as the non-farm payroll report. It comes out on the first Friday of every single month, and it gives us this incredibly detailed picture of what's happening with jobs all across the country. So what's actually in this thing? Well, first, it's got the national unemployment rate. Is it going up, down? That's huge. Then it tells us exactly how many jobs were created, or, and this is the scary part, how many were lost that month. It even looks at average hourly earnings. Are people's wages growing, or are they stuck? And finally, the labor force participation rate. Basically, what percentage of Americans are actually working or trying to find work? If you see all these numbers turn negative and stay negative for a few months in a row, that's the clearest sign that our patient is getting sick. And this isn't just some abstract theory. If we look back at recent history, there's an undeniable pattern. Major economic problems have been followed consistently by stimulus payments. It's like a playbook they've used over and over again. Just look at this timeline. It lays it out perfectly. Back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, the government sent out $300 checks. Then you fast forward to 2008, the huge housing crisis, the Great Recession. That amount doubled to $600. And then, of course, 2020. The pandemic shuts down the entire world economy, and that first check was $1,200. See the trend? Every single time a massive economic crisis was followed by cash payments directly to the people. You see it, right? It's not just that they sent checks. Look at the amounts. From $300 to $600, it doubled. From $600 to $1,200, it doubled again. Now, look, history isn't always a perfect predictor, but that's a pretty interesting trajectory. It suggests that with each new crisis, lawmakers felt the need for a bigger and bigger dose of that economic medicine. So, does this mean the next check would automatically be $2,400? Well, not so fast. This is just us looking at a historical pattern. It's pure speculation. Any future amount would depend entirely on how bad the next crisis is. A mild recession might only call for a small check, but a really deep economic collapse, a number like this could definitely be on the table. The size of the check is always tied to the size of the problem. And that brings us to another really critical idea. It's not just about how much money, it's about how it's sent out. See, the last few rounds of checks went to something like 85% of all Americans. But there's a growing argument that maybe, just maybe, that broad shotgun approach isn't the smartest way to do it. Let's compare these two ideas. Broad relief, that's what we're used to, goes to almost everybody. The problem is, a lot of people who get it don't really need it, so they save it. That doesn't help the economy, and it can actually push inflation higher. The other idea is targeted relief. This would focus the money only on low and fixed income folks, the people who are guaranteed to go out and spend it right away on necessities. This gives you way more bang for your buck with less risk of inflation. It could even mean multiple smaller payments over time instead of just one big one. And that is the absolute fundamental truth of all of this. We have to remember this. A stimulus check is not meant to be a contribution to your savings account. The entire purpose, the only purpose, is to get you to spend it. They want that money flowing through stores and businesses immediately. Buying food, paying bills, getting your car fixed. That spending is the jolt of electricity the economy needs to snap out of a recession. Okay, so let's put this all together. Instead of listening to rumors online, here's a clear, simple dashboard of what you should actually be watching for. These are the real signals. Think of it as a three-step domino effect. First, you'd see the warning signs. That monthly jobs report would start showing really bad numbers. Month after month, job losses, unemployment taking up a lot. Second, after enough bad data, the experts would make it official. We are in a recession. And third, it's only then, when the crisis is real and undeniable, that you'd see lawmakers in Congress finally scramble to put a stimulus package together, which would probably include direct payments. So, the bottom line, the most crucial takeaway from all of this is this. Right now, with the economy as it is, a fourth stimulus check just isn't happening. The trigger isn't an online petition, it's not a politician's promise. The only trigger is a real, measurable, and significant economic crisis, one that's bad enough to force Congress to act. Understanding this lets you see past all the noise and know exactly what to look for. And that kind of leaves us with one last big question to think about. We've seen the stimulus playbook change over time, right? The amounts got bigger, and now we're talking about new, more targeted strategies. So, as our economy keeps evolving and faces new and different challenges, how will the government's medicine have to adapt to actually keep working? Something to think about.
If you're one of the tens of millions of Americans who get Social Security, there's a new proposal making some serious waves that you really need to hear about. An advocacy group is pushing hard for a pretty significant, one-time payment for everybody who gets benefits. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what this proposal is, why it's even on the table right now, and what it could all mean for you.
So let's just cut right to the chase. The number at the very heart of this whole conversation is $1,400. Now, this isn't some new monthly increase or a tiny adjustment we see every year. Nope, this is a proposal for a single, direct payment. The whole point is to provide some immediate financial relief. It's a pretty big number, and it's meant to tackle a financial strain that, according to proponents, has been building up for years now.
So who would actually get this money? Well, the proposal isn't just for one small group. It's designed to cover absolutely everyone who receives Social Security benefits. That means retirees, of course, but it also includes folks on Supplemental Security Income, that's SSI, and Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI. The whole idea is to give a big, broad-based boost to all beneficiaries who are trying to make ends meet on these fixed incomes.
Okay, so why now? Why this big push for a $1,400 payment all of a sudden? Well, the answer really gets into a long-running debate over something called the COLA, the Cost of Living Adjustment. The people behind this payment argue at the system we're using right now to adjust benefits for inflation, well, they say it's fundamentally broken and that millions of people are falling further and further behind because of it.
Every year, Social Security benefits get a little bump, a percentage increase, to help people keep their buying power as the prices for, well, everything go up. That's the COLA. And in theory, it sounds like a perfect system, right? If your rent, your groceries, and your gas all get more expensive, your benefits should go up to match. But, and this is a big but, the core argument of this new proposal is that in the real world, it's just not working that way at all.
The main voice you're hearing behind this push is a nonpartisan group called the Senior Citizens League, or TSCL for short. For years, they've been making this case that the annual COLA increases are, to put it simply, just not enough. They argue there's this growing gap between the benefit increases people get in their checks and the actual real-world inflation they're facing, especially for the big things like housing, food, and of course, healthcare.
And this right here gets to the technical, kind of nerdy heart of the problem. See, the current COLA is calculated using something called the CPIW. It basically tracks the spending habits of younger, working-age people in cities. But critics, like the TSCL, say that's a huge flaw. Why? Because the spending habits of a 40-year-old office worker are completely different from a 75-year-old retiree. For example, seniors spend a much bigger chunk of their income on healthcare, a cost that the CPIW barely registers. So the TSCL wants to switch to the CPIE, which is based on the spending of the elderly. They say this would finally give a true picture of the inflation seniors are up against and lead to much fairer benefit increases.
And this quote from Shannon Benton, the executive director at TSCL, it really frames the whole issue perfectly. For years and years, beneficiaries have been saying, hey, my costs are going up way faster than my benefits. This quote flips the whole script. It says, instead of doubting the lived daily experience of millions of people on fixed incomes, maybe, just maybe, it's time to admit that the tool we're using to measure their costs is the thing that's actually broken.
So moving beyond all the technical arguments about inflation and indexes, what's the real-world evidence for this payment? Well, the TSCL has gathered some really compelling data that, honestly, paints a pretty stark picture of the financial pressures that millions of beneficiaries are dealing with right now, today.
Just let this number sink in for a minute. 7.3 million. According to the TSCL's research, that is how many American seniors are trying to get by on less than $1,000 a month. That's not just a low number, it's below the federal poverty line. And as the organization points out, in most cities, that's less than what you'd pay for just a modest apartment, let alone food, utilities, medicine, everything else. This is the reality that's fueling this urgent call for relief. And this dependency it's absolutely key to understanding the problem. For so many people, Social Security isn't just a little extra check to help out. It's their entire livelihood. This research shows that for nearly 4 out of every 10 beneficiaries, Social Security isn't just part of their income, it is 100% of their income. So when that's your only source of money, even a small gap between your benefit increases and the rising cost of living can be completely devastating.
And when you look at the opinions of the beneficiaries themselves, the message is crystal clear. A survey by the TSCL found just overwhelming support for changing how the COLA is calculated.
We're talking 96% in favor of using an index like the CPIE that actually reflects their spending. The survey also found that 1/5 of seniors are spending over $1,000 a month just on healthcare. And maybe the most telling part, 4 out of 5 felt that inflation was way higher than the official numbers the government was reporting. So this isn't just a policy debate, it's this widespread feeling of being left behind. Now, it's really important to understand that this whole idea of a direct payment isn't just coming out of thin air. There's actually a history of the federal government providing this exact kind of direct assistance. This $1,400 proposal is really part of a much bigger ongoing conversation about how we can strengthen Social Security benefits for everyone. If you look back, you can see some really clear examples. Back during the Great Recession in 2009, the government sent out $250 economic recovery payments to people on Social Security and SSI. And of course, much more recently, during the pandemic, millions of us got those economic impact payments, the stimulus checks. The TSCL points to these examples as proof that when things get economically uncertain, the government can and has stepped in with direct financial help. This new proposal fits right into that pattern.
And this proposal for a one-time payment, it's not the only idea out there for boosting benefits. Not by a long shot. There have been several other pretty big plans discussed recently. For example, Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren brought back the Social Security Expansion Act. That's a bill that would increase benefits by $2,400 a year, so $200 every month. And similarly, during his 2020 campaign, Joe Biden also proposed a $200 per month increase. This all just goes to show that the push for a $1,400 check is part of a much wider call from a lot of different people to provide more substantial support.
So with all of this context, you've got the flawed COLA, the real financial hardship, the history of these kinds of payments, and all these other proposals floating around, we finally get to the big question. We have this compelling proposal on the table. So what happens next? Where does this whole idea go from here? Okay, this right here is the most important thing to clarify right now. The $1,400 catch-up payment is a proposal from the Senior Citizens League. It is not a bill sitting in Congress, and it is definitely not a law. It's an idea that's being pushed by a very influential advocacy group to spark a conversation and, frankly, to put some pressure on lawmakers. The goal is to get this concept onto the legislative agenda, but as of today, that's what it is, a proposal. So let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways from all this. First, a major advocacy group, the TSCL, is pushing for a one-time $1,400 payment. Second, this is a direct response to the cost of living adjustments that they say just haven't kept up with real-world inflation for seniors. Third, their case is backed up by some pretty stark data on financial hardship. And finally, this kind of direct payment isn't new. It has been used before during tough economic times.
And that leaves us with this final really crucial question. This $1,400 proposal, it's a potential short-term fix for a very long-term problem. And whether this specific plan ever moves forward or not, the underlying issues, how do we accurately measure inflation for seniors? How do we make sure benefits provide a dignified standard of living? Those questions aren't going away. It really forces all of us to think bigger. As our economy keeps changing, how does this fundamental pillar of our social safety net need to evolve right along with it?
This whole debate has proven one thing for sure. Millions of seniors are struggling financially. But is another benefit increase the real long-term answer? Or is it just the temporary patch on a system that needs fundamental, deep reform to survive for the next generation? That is the real question for the future of Social Security.
So what would it really take for another round of stimulus checks to be sent out? It is, without a doubt, a question on millions of people's minds. And you know what? The answer might be a lot closer than you think. Today, we're going to cut through all the noise and look at the real, concrete economic signals that could actually trigger that next wave of support. Look, this is the question, right? It's probably one of the most common questions being asked right now. And if you're wondering about it, you are definitely not alone. The fact that so many people are even asking tells its own story. A lot of folks are feeling the financial squeeze. But to find the real answer, we can't just look at our own finances. We have to look somewhere else entirely. And this is the fundamental idea we have to start with. A stimulus check, sure, it feels incredibly personal. It lands right in your bank account. But where it comes from? Not personal at all. You have to think of it like a giant emergency lever the government pulls when the entire economic engine of the country starts to stall. They're not trying to fix your personal budget. They're trying to fix the country's economy. Okay, let's really break this down because this gets right to the heart of everything. On one side, you have the common assumption, which makes total sense. People are hurting, they need help, so the government should help. It's logical.
But on the other side, you have the economic reality. The government really only acts when the entire economy is in trouble, when it's shrinking, when it's heading for a recession. Those stimulus checks we get are really just a side effect of that much bigger problem. The economy is the patient, and the stimulus check is the emergency medicine.
So if we're going to be economic detectives, watching for these signs of weakness, where do we look first? Well, there is one single report that stands head and shoulders above all the rest. It's the most important vital sign for the U.S. economy, and that is the monthly jobs report.
Every first Friday of the month, this report drops, and it's basically a national health checkup. It's the biggest barometer we've got. Now, the unemployment rate, that's the headline number everyone talks about. But the details inside are what really tell the story. You see things like average hourly earnings. Are people's wages actually keeping up with prices? And maybe the most important one is the labor participation rate. That tells us if people are so discouraged that they've just given up looking for a job altogether. Put it all together and you get a really clear picture of whether the economy is creating jobs or losing them.
I want you to just look at this number for a second. 1.8 million. It's a huge, huge figure. What in the world could that represent? Well, this number is the key to understanding why even tiny little changes in that jobs report have absolutely massive consequences. And there it is. For every single percentage point the unemployment rate goes up, another 1.8 million people have lost their jobs. Just let that sink in. A headline might say unemployment ticked up by 0.1%. That sounds like nothing, right? But that tiny tick means 180,000 people are suddenly out of work. It's not just a statistic. It's a huge wave of disruption hitting families and towns all across the country. And that disruption, it doesn't stop there.
This is where we see the snowball effect. It's what economists call a vicious cycle. You see, a weak job market isn't just a one-time thing. It's the start of a chain reaction that can pull the whole economy down. It starts out pretty slow, but believe me, it picks up speed really, really fast.
Let's walk through this dangerous cycle. So first, the unemployment rate starts to climb. What happens next? Well, naturally, when people lose their paychecks, they stop spending money. So step 2, consumer spending falls. People put off buying that car or fixing the roof or even just eating out. Then, because customers aren't buying, businesses see their sales drop. So step 3, they contract. They cut back, they cancel plans, and eventually they have to do more layoffs. And that, of course, leads to step 4, pushing the unemployment rate even higher. You see how this works? The cycle just keeps feeding on itself, getting worse each time around. This quote just captures it perfectly. The government is watching this cycle gain speed and momentum. They know that once it really gets going, it's incredibly hard to stop. And that exact moment, when that cycle is threatening to spiral, that's when stimulus checks go from being a vague idea to an urgent plan. The whole point of a stimulus check is to jump right into step 2, to boost consumer spending and try to break that cycle before it gets any worse. So the jobs report is signal number 1 for sure, but there's another really crucial indicator that tells the same story: what the Federal Reserve is doing with interest rates. Watching the Fed gives us a peek behind the curtain at their private assessment of how the economy is really doing. It's really a tale of 2 different approaches. When the economy is running hot and growing fast, the Fed worries about inflation. So they raise interest rates to make borrowing money more expensive, which kind of cools everything down. But the opposite is also true. When the Fed starts cutting interest rates, that is a crystal clear signal that they think the economy is weak and needs a boost. They're making it cheaper to borrow money to try and get businesses and people spending again. And this brings us to a super important rule of thumb. When you see the Federal Reserve start aggressively cutting interest rates, even if officials are on TV saying the economy is strong, you need to pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Those rate cuts are a hidden signal. They're a quiet admission that behind the scenes, the data they're looking at is worrying enough to step in. They're trying to get ahead of a bigger problem. And this isn't just some abstract theory. This link between a weak economy and a big government response is a very well-established pattern. In fact, if you look back at every major recession we've had in recent memory, the playbook is remarkably consistent. I mean, the historical record here is undeniable. In 2001, after the tech bubble popped, boom, we got stimulus checks. In 2008, during the Great Financial Crisis, boom, stimulus checks. And in 2020, when the pandemic started, boom, we got multiple rounds of stimulus checks. Every single major economic downturn in the last 25 years has been met with the exact same response. It's just become a standard tool in the economic toolkit. This quote from one of the sources just says it all, doesn't it? The response is predictable. When the economy hits a major wall, rising unemployment, shrinking growth, The government and the Fed act. They cut interest rates and they send out money. History shows us this isn't really an if question anymore. It's a when question.
Now, a lot of us think the government is just too slow to react, but when a real crisis hits, they can move with incredible speed. Let's just look at the example from late 2020. A stimulus bill was signed into law on December 28th. The very next day, December 29th, direct deposits were already starting to hit people's bank accounts. Within a week, almost everyone had their money. The point is, the system is already built. When they decide to turn on the faucet, the money can flow almost immediately.
So, this really brings us to the ultimate takeaway. We need to shift how we think about this. The real question isn't if the government will do this again. History tells us they will. The real question is, what's the pain threshold? How bad does the economy have to get? How high does unemployment have to climb before they're finally forced to pull that lever one more time? By understanding these signals, the jobs report, what the Fed is doing, the historical pattern, you're now equipped to watch the economy for yourself. So the next time you see a headline about the unemployment rate ticking up, you'll know it isn't just a number, it's a signal. And the real question is, how many more of those signals will we need to see before action becomes inevitable?
Today, we are diving deep into a really critical conversation that's happening right now about the financial health of millions of American seniors. With costs going through the roof and benefits just not keeping up, there are two major ideas on the table. One is a one-time stimulus-style payment for some quick relief. The other, a permanent change to how Social Security benefits are calculated for long-term stability. Let's get into it.
I want to start with just one number. Look at this, 5 million. It's a massive figure, and honestly, it represents a very real and growing crisis that we just can't ignore.
So, what does 5 million mean? Well, that's the estimated number of seniors whose Social Security checks will fall below the poverty line by next year. This isn't some far-off problem, it's right around the corner. And it's a financial reality that is sparking a huge conversation all across the country about how we can provide some real, meaningful support.
All right, so here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we're going to break down the financial squeeze that so many seniors are feeling. Then, we'll dig into why the system that's supposed to help, that annual cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is actually falling short. From there, we'll look at the two big solutions being proposed, a one-time payment versus a permanent fix. And finally, we'll see where this whole debate is headed.
Okay, let's get to the heart of the problem, this day-to-day financial squeeze. For millions of retirees, that Social Security check was supposed to be a rock of stability. But now it feels like it's shrinking every month, even if the number on the check is the same. It's creating this intense, constant financial pressure.
You know, this quote from the Senior Citizens League really hits the nail on the head. A sharp erosion in their purchasing power. What does that actually mean? It means the money you have just doesn't go as far. The same $100 bill that used to cover a week of groceries now barely covers a few days. That gap between income and the actual cost of living is just getting wider and wider.
And look, this isn't some abstract economic theory. It has real-world consequences. We're talking about seniors having to choose between paying their rent and buying medicine. We're talking about falling behind on home payments or stressing about the utility bill. And a huge piece of this puzzle, as the source material points out, is the sky-high cost of healthcare. Some seniors are shelling out over $1,000 a month out of pocket, even with Medicare. So, you might be thinking, wait a minute, isn't there a system for this? Don't they adjust benefits for inflation every year? And the answer is yes, they do. But a huge part of the problem is how they calculate that adjustment. It's called the cost of living adjustment, or COLA. On paper, it's a fantastic idea. Every year, benefits get a bump to help people keep pace with rising prices. Sounds perfect, right? Well, in practice, there's a fundamental flaw in the machine.
And this, right here, this is the core of the issue. The current COLA is based on something called the CPIW. It tracks the spending habits of younger, working-age people. But think about it. The budget of a 35-year-old is completely different from a 75-year-old's, right? The current formula barely accounts for seniors' biggest expenses, especially healthcare. The proposed fix is to switch to the CPIE, an index designed specifically for the elderly. It would actually track what seniors spend their money on, which could lead to much more realistic benefit increases.
And here's what that flawed calculation looks like in the real world. This year's 2.5% COLI increase? For a lot of people, it was completely eaten up by the jump in Medicare Part B premiums. So, the Social Security check got a little bigger, but another key expense grew right along with it. The end result? Zero actual increase in their spending power. They were left standing in the exact same spot.
Okay, so since the current system clearly isn't cutting it, advocates are pushing for solutions. And the first major proposal is all about immediate impact, a one-time catch-up payment. Think of it like a targeted stimulus check just for Social Security recipients.
The number that keeps coming up, the one recommended most often by analysts and experts, is $1,400. This is seen as a big enough payment to provide some real, immediate breathing room for folks who've fallen behind on bills or need to cover a major expense.
Now, while the idea of a one-time check is gaining a lot of steam, the exact amount is still being debated. Some point back to a $250 payment made in 2009, but with today's costs, many experts are saying that's just not enough. They're pushing for a much more significant figure, like that $1,400 we just saw, or even as high as $2,000 to really make a meaningful difference.
The Senior Citizens League is a major voice behind this idea. They call it a make-up payment, and that framing is really important. They're basically saying, listen, for years the COLA has shortchanged seniors. This payment isn't a handout. It's about making up for that lost ground. It's all about providing a financial lifeline right now.
But, a one-time payment is kind of like a bandage. It helps right away, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem. And that brings us to the second major proposal, a permanent, structural fix to the COLA formula itself.
And the support for this idea among the people it would actually affect is, well, it's absolutely overwhelming. A survey found that 96% of Social Security beneficiaries want to switch to the CPI-E. That's not just a majority, that's a nearly unanimous call for a real systemic change.
So, how would this actually work? Well, first, Congress would have to pass a law to officially adopt the CPI-E. Right away, that new formula would start tracking the costs that seniors really face, like housing and out-of-pocket medical expenses. Since those costs tend to rise faster, the annual COLA would almost certainly be higher. This would mean that monthly checks wouldn't just get a tiny bump. They'd grow in a meaningful way year after year.
And let's be clear, this is not a small tweak. According to analysts, switching to the CPI-E could boost monthly benefits by an estimated $200 to $500 every single month. Let's make that real. If your current benefit is, say, $1,500 a month, this change could potentially push it to $1,700 or even $2,000. That's not a one-time check. That's a permanent raise to your monthly income, forever.
So, we're at a crossroads, right? We have two very different approaches on the table. One is like a rapid infusion of cash to deal with the crisis we're in right now. The other is a deep structural reform designed to prevent this crisis from ever happening again.
Let's break it down side by side. The one-time stimulus is all about immediate help, a big chunk of cash to help people who are drowning in bills today. The permanent COLA fix is about long-term security, a smaller but consistent monthly boost that ensures people's benefits actually keep up with their costs in the future. It's a classic debate. Do you solve the urgent problem of the present, or do you secure the future?
And this isn't just talk. This debate has real political momentum. You have lawmakers from both sides of the aisle, people like Bernie Sanders and Bill Cassidy, all pushing for some kind of benefit increase. That bipartisan interest tells you just how urgent and widespread this problem has become.
Which brings us to the one central question this entire debate rests on. What do seniors need most right now? Is it the immediate urgent relief of a one-time payment to help them catch up, or is it the lasting security of a permanent structural fix? That's the choice facing policymakers, and the decision they make will impact millions of lives for years to come.
So let's talk about something you've probably heard a lot about, this idea of giving every single person on Social Security an extra $200 a month. I mean, on the surface, it sounds amazing, right? A huge boost for millions of people. But, as we're about to find out, when you dig into the details, it gets a whole lot more complicated. All right, let's get into it.
You know, this one quote really just sums up the whole thing perfectly. It's a plan that comes from a really good place, trying to help folks who depend on Social Security. But it's also got this giant, fundamental flaw that makes it, well, almost impossible to actually do. So the big question we're going to tackle here is, what's the good part, and what's the really, really flawed part? And maybe, just maybe, is there a better way to do it?
So, first things first, where did this idea even come from? Because it's not just some rumor bouncing around online. Nope, it actually comes from real legislative proposals that have been kicked around for years. Let's break down what this plan is really all about.
Okay, so this whole idea is a huge piece of something called the Social Security Expansion Act. Now, this act has a lot in it, but the part that gets all the headlines, the part everyone talks about, is that permanent $200 a month raise in benefits. And it's important to note this isn't some brand new idea. A temporary version was talked about back in 2020, but this proposal, this one wants to make that raise a permanent part of Social Security.
Now let's be super clear about what this means for an individual. That $200 every month adds up to an extra $2,400 over a year. I mean, for anyone on a fixed income, that is a life-changing amount of money. Seriously, that could be the difference between just scraping by and actually having some breathing room. And the big promise here is that every single person getting a Social Security check gets this money.
An extra $2,400 a year. Sounds great, doesn't it? But this right here is where we bump into the other half of that quote we started with, the massively flawed part. And it all boils down to one thing, the absolutely staggering cost of making that promise to everybody. When you start running the numbers, you see the real problem.
First, you have to wrap your head around just how massive the Social Security program is. We are talking about roughly 72.5 million people getting a check every month. And that's not just retirees. This includes people on disability, it includes survivors.